Hey guys, what if Naruto became Scaled King and got Kusanagi movie? But before we start, if you want more amazing stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, if possible, share this video with your friends. Now without wasting any more time, let's begin the story. The sky darkened, thundering like an angry beast as lightning climbed through the clouds, rain hammering the world below as a child started running home. He was small and thin, like he had skipped several meals. Sunny blonde hair along with bright blue eyes. A glint of fear glowing within them as he started running. After all, bad things, very bad things happened when it was dark out. Usually he was home hiding in his apartment by now, but he had ended up talking to the Ichirakus and lost track of time. His white shirt now soaked with rain as he ran through a muddy puddle, further wetting his small feet. The jury-rigged straps holding his tattered blue sandals unsnapped. However, the blonde kept running, not even noticing as they were lodged into the mud, making schlunking sound as they sunk deeper into the gunk. He could hear the shouts calling for him with glowing orange torches and freshly sharpened pitchforks. The blonde wasn't an idiot, no matter what the villagers chose to believe. No, for a 4-year-old he was rather average in intellect. He knew that should they catch him they would hurt him. He didn't know why they wanted to hurt him, but he knew they would. As a 4-year-old he didn't really understand the concept of death. If he did, he would have understood that this time they weren't looking to hurt him this time. No, this time they were going for broke. This time the villager were aiming to kill. Armed with kunai, they had managed to weasel out of a weapon merchant from Cloud Country. They would make it look like another village had done the deed. Anyone who heard their sadistic calls for the child would have been able to see this. That was the reason they had chased the child into the alleys. No one went inside besides runaways and criminals, people who would never rat them out since it would mean putting themselves in the spotlight as well. The whiskered blonde rushed past a corner, raindrops pounding on his back. A sense of hope filled him as a ghost of smile formed on his face. It was only 1 block to his apartment. He could make it. It was only just a bit further. Only for fear to grip his heart as a hand snaked around his neck and held his mouth shut just as he was about to scream. The world blurred as his head was slammed into the wall of the alley. The sickening crack of the 4-year-old's head banging against the wall lost easily to the snap of thunder. Lightning screamed as it struck the ground in some far-off place as he was pulled away, unable to resist as he was dragged back into the alleys deeper and deeper, the muddy ground scraping harshly against his unprotected feet. By the time the blonde could make out his surrounding, a bunch of people were crowding all around him like he was some sort of circus attraction. He tried to sit up only to find he had been bound to some sort of table. It was only then did the boy register the fact there was a roof above him. A whisper to the side caught his attention as he focused on it. "Don't be so anxious, its healing factor will be failing any minute now. Then we can get this nightmare over with." He didn't catch the rest of the conversation as they seemed to realize he was awake. The crowd's quiet observation quickly became loud jeering sadism as they yelled for his death. A man walked up to him, apparently not a part of the crowd, as he took out a strange-looking knife that had seen ninja use before. He grabbed his right hand as trailed the blade over his wrist, leaving a small cut across his arm. Ruby liquid leaking out from his skin as the man stared at the cut, as if waiting for something. Minutes had crawled by when the man let out a twisted smile. He took the knife and stabbed the blonde's belly. Pain lanced through him, a silent scream breaking out of his mouth as malicious energy rushed through his body, before he was knocked unconscious. Unknown to the boy, a corrosive red mist oozed out from the wound on his stomach. Strange tribal marks started glowing around, revealing the seal of the 9-tailed fox. The originally black marks turned orange as one of the closer villager looked at the seal. Gasping, the villager realized the knife was going straight through the kanji for seal. Naruto Uzumaki was floating. His eyes opening slowly, he gave the world around him a glance. He was tired, very tired. Even opening his eyes was a struggle, as he observed that he was in some sort of sewer with gigantic gate in front of him. It was a shiny bronze gate with a single circular lock with the word seal in the middle, cracked in half. Big red slitted eyes filled with the echoes of dead men slid open on the other side of the gate as it slinked out from within the shadows, revealing it to be a gigantic fox with rustic orange fur, as it sat languidly in front of the gate, giving him a tired glance as it rested on its haunches, raising a paw as if to give him a wave. Blood-red eyes glowed ominously as they trailed his form, bloodlust trickling from the beast's body, the Vulpine character seemingly wearing it like a freshly woven coat. "Bye, kid. It was nice knowing you, I suppose." The fox paused now. "It seems I have a village to play with," the fox said, though it seemed to be talking to itself rather than the blonde. The blonde struggled as he only managed a drowsy complaint. Don't hurt Ayame ne-san. Or Tuchi-san there nice. Memories of warm smiles and yummy food on cold night flooded his mind. So nice. The fox gave a half-hearted chuckle that shook the room, as the child spoke listlessly. Sure kid. I'll see you in the next life, it said as the world went black once more, the blonde floating in an abyss of nothingness. Little did the blonde know Konoha would nothing but a crater by the end of the day, the only two known survivors from the ordeal walking away from what was once their home, as they trudged away with nothing but a ramen cart and a hope to see their best customer once more, even as a lucky few managed to crawl out from the wreckage, with skin soon to show the scars. A little girl watched these events, noting an errant flash of light disappearing into the fabric of time itself. She gave a giggle as she played with her pink hair. This is going to be so much fun. She yelled out into the blank space she inhabited. Roars of anger answering her call, whispers of annoyance, calls of boredom, and sighs of resignation mixed within the wave of hatred. The girl paid no attention as she smiled cheerfully, content to watch this story, legend, no, this epic unfold. The sun blanketed the hospital room. A set of cheerful yellow flowers set in a vase on the counter next to the blonde as rested, resting peacefully as his chest rose and fell with each breath. No one would have ever guessed the child was in a coma, and they most certainly never would have guessed what left the 4-year-old in such a state. Well, someone could have guessed the blonde was in a car accident, which did account for his physical state, but they never would have guessed the miracle that was his spiritual state. They never would have guessed the sunny blonde they knew and loved had been saved by himself, by a little sliver of silver light that had slipped through time itself. They would have never guessed that one titanic fox with fur the color of rust was quite serious when he said he would see the child in his next life. Ichiro Kusanagi sighed sadly as he walked through the halls of the hospital, his nephew Naruto, son of Mirai Kusanagi and Arata Yoshida, both having died a month previous in a plane crash. Naruto being the only survivor was a miracle in itself. The entire thing started when one car crashed into another one, nothing big, until it turned into a 14-car pileup with a single tanker which happened to be carrying a rather strong experimental drug, a drug that had shown to be extremely fatal without immediate medical attention. Naruto wasn't just the only survivor of the car crash, he was one of the only living things within 4 blocks. The fact he didn't have physical wounds besides a large bump on his head only increased the miracle of his continued existence. Of course, the chemical also had a chance to cause amnesia due to some sort of effect it has on the brain, the rest of the doctor's explanation having gone over the old man's head. The paperwork had gone through a week ago, marking both himself and his wife as the boy's guardians for the foreseeable future, or at least when he was released from the hospital, that is. That was another strange thing. The doctors had no idea why the boy was still in a coma. As far as they could tell, the boy was perfectly fine. No, that didn't matter. He's shaking his head as he looked down at the 3-year-old child next to him. He had somewhat messy black hair, along with black eyes sparkling with happiness as the child thought about seeing his cousin again. A common white t-shirt and a set jeans adorned his body, causing the toddler to be easily overlooked for kids with brighter and more hyperactive personalities. Combined with the boy's obsession with being utterly normal, and the kid was practically a ghost. Heck, the only time had ever seen Godu get louder than a polite tone was when Naruto had dumped a bucket of water on him a few weeks before the crash. He still had no idea how the 4-year-old had gotten that bucket on top of the door in the first place. It defied common logic. Scratching his gray hair, Ichiro dismissed the errant thoughts. He needed to be there for Godu. The younger Kusanagi had yet to see the child since the blonde had fallen into the coma. And in all honesty, Ichiro wanted to wait a bit longer before have the toddler witness a close friend sitting there with tubes sticking out his body, unresponsive to the world. The gray-haired man had gone through something much the same when his mother passed from cancer long beforehand. Hopefully the toddler wouldn't be too affected by the visit. Come on, Godu-chan. Pulling the child along by the hand, he got the room number from the receptionist, the child nodding along all the way. Marching down the tile halls, ignoring the scent of chemicals that were practically weaved into the building itself thanks to prolonged use, footsteps clattering against the floor as they navigated the busy halls, only to turn into a quieter area. It had almost 20 doors going down the hall, but only 2 were in use at the moment. The Kusanagi elder checked his watch, showing that it was 8:23 a.m. Thankfully, the hospital's visiting hours stretched from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. The duo stopped in front of one door. Taking a deep breath, the older man reached out and turned the doorknob. The door opened smoothly without a sound as it swung open. The room inside was a typical hospital room, with the exception being the excess amount of machines in the room beeping at a steady pace. A window catching the sun as rose into the sky bouncing off of emerald leaves of trees in a nearby park. The old man's breath caught in his throat as a blond child turned away from the window as he caught sight of the duo's entry. He smiled in such pure angelic way tears almost made an appearance as the old Kusanagi looked at the blond child. Some part of his mind told him that this wasn't Naruto Yoshida, or unbeknownst to the elder Naruto Uzumaki. No, this was Naruto Kusanagi, the man who would be known around the world as they whispered his name, as they clanked their glasses together in the near future. To Naruto Kusanagi, the scaled king. The hustle and bustle of the airport echoed in his ears as he walked about, blonde hair shoved about by the heavy-duty heaters. A small smile broke onto his whiskered face as he walked through the doors of the Tokyo airport, blue eyes alight with a happy glow as they trailed the not-so-unfamiliar airport. A strong winter wind blew past him as if saying welcome back, only for thunder to crack above like it was yelling, now get off my lawn. Chuckling at his own abnormal thoughts, he took a deep breath before he gave a whispered home sweet home. After all, it wasn't every day he came back home after having gone abroad from boarding school since he was 9, but then again he was only 12, so it wasn't that big of a deal. He shook his head now. What was the taxi company's number? He thought, digging into his pockets. Oh, there it is. Dialing the number on his phone, he gave a quick look around. It was just beginning to get dark. Students passing by on the street going home after finishing their Christmas shopping, all decked out in heavy coat and scarves. He himself was wearing a surprisingly heavy coat, as in both meant for fairly cold weather and very heavy in terms of weight as well. He doubted most of the kids he knew would be able to pick it up at all. The price paid for good winter gear. A cheerful smile made it onto Naruto's face as he noticed the taxi stopping in the airport parking lot. He gave the driver a blinding smile as he hopped into the yellow vehicle, giving the driver, who as it turned out was a rather well-dressed man, the address. They were soon zooming off to their destination. He stared out the window in nostalgia, noticing people exchanging gifts in the street, others talking happily as they walked by. Store full of Christmas decoration, some full of children, their parents watching them as they stared at all the new toys, some cheering about new video games. It truly has been too long, the blonde thought wistfully, as he observed the changes since he had gone abroad. His attention was brought back to reality upon noticing a young girl skipping beside her mother as she apparently asked to be given whatever it was she had bought. The mother sighed in exasperation as she dipped her hand into her shopping bag, extracting a book from within. If he were younger, the blonde would have froze as she handed her daughter the book, two memories shooting through his head violently. An older woman laid in bed, a blonde toddler sitting wrapped in her arms as she read a book, and with a great heave the knight stabbed the dragon, freeing the princes it held captive, she said as the blonde child giggled to the story. The woman smiled beautifully as she gave the child a kiss on the head. Good night, she said as she got up from the bed, the child pouting as she left the room. An old lady scowled as she ripped a book from a young blonde's hands. Demons don't get to read, she screamed as another person held the blonde's wrists with one and lit a match with the other. The child struggled, tears in his eyes as he tried to get his hand out of the vice-like grip, only for it to be useless as the match burned the palms of his hands. Screams of pain ripped out of his throat. The pair giggled as they moved to burn his other hand. When he was younger, he used to break down crying his eyes out, like any normal child, but Naruto Kusanagi was far from normal, no matter what everyone around him liked to think. He had been living with these flashbacks since the car crash, chemical leak that had taken his memories, though they had thankfully become far less common with time, to point that this was the first one had had in years. Since then he had recalled the entirety of both Naruto Yoshida and Naruto Uzumaki's lives. He also knew for a fact he was neither of predecessors. He was Naruto Kusanagi, the result of Naruto Uzumaki and Naruto Yoshida merging into one being. The Kusanagi knew he was an impossible existence, a being with more than one soul, but two parts of two very different people mixed together. He was being with more than a soul but less than two. Acting in line with his unusual existence, he didn't give the barest hint that anything had happened at all. The only thing different than usual was his somewhat tight smile as he gave a tired sigh. Just your everyday life of your common sorta dimension traveler. Please pay no attention, the blonde mumbled under his breath. Grumbling to himself, he barely noticed as the taxi pulled over to the curb, his almost 2-hour drive already over. This is as far as I can go, kid, the driver said gruffly. The blonde shrugged. It wasn't that far, just down the alley, so it wasn't problem to walk the rest of the way. Throwing some cash at the taxi driver, he didn't pay any attention for the fact he had given double the actual cost. too lost in thought as he shut the door to the cab. He waved goodbye to the taxi as it drove away. When it was out of sight, he turned around instead of a lazy trot down the alley. He didn't pay much attention to the many stores in the alley selling fruits and other things despite the cold along with the coming night, only to give a mournful half-frown, half-genial smile that in hindsight probably made him look rather funny, if the looks people were giving had anything to say at least. He didn't much attention to that though. No, he was looking at the sliding door that led to an old shut-down bookstore. The place was a leftover from World War II, that had been added onto 3 or 4 separate times, making the place a comfortable home, despite all the books that were hanging around in the attic. "The last time I was here was for Aunt Chio's funeral, wasn't it?" He gave a tired sigh. He had originally started going to boarding school when he was 8, at the time he had been ecstatic, and couldn't wait to go, but then Aunt Chio had collapsed. It wasn't a week later that she had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. He couldn't name where it was for the specific reason it was all over the place. Never mind that, the problem was that the week she was supposed to start chemotherapy was a week after he had to be at the boarding school. A school that it was so rare to even be accepted in. It wasn't funny. It caused some friction with the family when he had chosen to go at his adoptive mother's request. For the next year he took every chance to visit her as possible, and for the next year she fought cancer. But one night, maybe a week or 2 after his 9th birthday, he was called home for a medical emergency. He wiped an errant tear from his face as the thought hit him. Had ended up rushing from Norway all the way back to Japan, only to arrive in time to have a far too short talk with his aunt before she passed. He remembered the nurses pushing them out of the room. Shizuka, his younger cousin, was bawling the entire drive back home. Godu was being unusually quiet, while Grandpa Ichiro was quietly sobbing as he drove them back to the Kusanagi residence. Naruto himself couldn't really remember what he had been doing during said drive. It was all too much of a blur. By the time they'd arrived home, the blonde doubted he could cry much more. They'd all shuffled inside the house, crowding around the living room. But then Godu snapped and proved why bottled-up emotions were a bad thing. Had gone on rant. Some things were said that they both probably regretted, and then the usually calm youth had gone and punched the blonde in the nose, breaking it and forever proving that playing baseball really helped you develop a strong right hook. Of course, by the time they'd broken up the fight, Naruto had broken both of Goddess' arms. So yeah, saying things had turned physical was a bit of an understatement. After that day the family was sort of split, he supposed. The next day had gone back to the boarding school, thankful for his strangely fast healing factor, as it meant he didn't have to wear any gauze on his nose. It wasn't completely healed, but it wasn't apparent either. Off topic. After that event, had practically gone out of his way to make sure his name was always at the top of the list for the students staying at the school for the summer. Other than that, had only ever talked to his uncle Ichiro, and a few sparse conversations with his cousin Shizuka. Godu. Well, he hadn't asked over the years, and Godu had done the same. Both them were waiting for the other to apologize first. They were stubborn like that. Things with Asuka, a childhood friend of his, and Godu, well, they could be better. At some point in time Godu had mentioned that Naruto had broken both of his arms in an offhanded comment. Asuka had let her mind run wild with it, and had gone out of her way to hang up on him after had decided to check up on her after Chio's passing. Naruto gave a sigh as he realized he'd been monologuing in an effort to stall his first face-to-face meeting with his family in 3 years. Doing his best to shove down his building anxiety, he took the last few steps to the door and took out his key. He almost chuckled as the thought of what his friends would say upon seeing the usually unmovable blonde. Being a sorta-dimension traveler really increased your tolerance for ridiculous shit. Shaking from the thought of seeing his family. The worst part was that his hand was actually trembling as he inserted his key into the door. Giving a quick prayer in hope that they hadn't changed the locks, he turned the key, the familiar sound of tumblers rotating and the click of the lock as Naruto sighed in relief. Cobalt eyes glowed in anxious anticipation as he slid the door open. Ichiro Kusanagi couldn't help but give an astonished gasp. In all honesty, the man never thought he would see his adoptive son enter his home willing ever again. So imagine his surprise when the front door slid to the side, revealing a somewhat tall 12-year-old with tarnished gold hair and cobalt blue eyes that stared at him sheepishly. The blonde rubbed the back of his head, a small smile on his whiskered cheeks as he chuckled awkwardly. A large green heavy coat draped over a white t-shirt with the words sanity? Is that a food surrounded by question marks in the color black, along with a pair of blue jeans. Sorry I am late, the blonde said lamely. He didn't get a chance to say anything else as Ichiro sprung to feet, something most people didn't believe he could do anymore, as he practically tackled the blonde, before he attempted to strangle him with a hug. He struggled briefly before he simply gave in and hugged the old man back. "Welcome home, Naruto, welcome home," Ichiro mumbled as he crushed his adoptive son. The blonde in turn sighed as he hugged his uncle tighter. "It's good to be back, Gramps." Neither of them noticed Shizuka until she entered the room, a fresh pot of tea in hand, only to almost drop it when she saw the blonde. Naruto Kusanagi knew he was an impossibility and abnormality within the very world's existence, but he supposed it wouldn't be a bad thing to try and hold on to his current feeling of being utterly normal, the feelings of warmth and comfort, as he pulled it close and held onto it, reveling in it for as long as he could. If only he knew how short that time would be. Naruto's eye twitched as a sweat beaded down from his forehead, stress taking its toll as he chewed on his lip idly. He was sitting on one side of their rather nice table in a comfortable couch. Shizuka was sitting next to, calmly drinking a small cup of freshly brewed tea. A set of her pink hair puff things. When he was younger, he often swore they were alive. Even now they still creeped him out. Standing out in her short brown hair, green eyes closed as she sipped from her cup of rather flowery-smelling tea. His Gramps was sitting on the other side of the table, mirroring Shizuka as he took a gulp of his tea. His brown hair salted with bits of gray as his aged black eyes smiled at him from across the table. Ichiro was wearing a pair of gray slacks along with a light blue button-up shirt. A pair of brown dress shoes completing the look. Looking at him, you would never have guessed his was well into his 60s and ready to turn 70 in a few years' time. It was no wonder why girls both young and old swarmed the man, as he gave the younger blonde a look that told him he knew exactly what he was thinking. Now that the blonde thought about it, his Ichiro did that quite a lot. It was like he could read people's minds or something. It didn't matter anyway, the blue-eyed boy sighed in his mind, as he gave the old man a glare that said, "I don't care if you know what I am doing, you lazy old man." Quite clearly, as the slightly grayed Kusanagi chuckled softly into his hand, grasping the message behind the look easily. Shizuka gave a half-hearted sigh as she ignored the duo, having long ago stopped trying to figure out how they talked without opening their mouths. As much as she and her older brother had spent with the older Kusanagi, which was actually a great deal more than the blonde, they would never be as close as Naruto was to Aikairu. She blew a tuft of hair out of her eyes as she grumbled to herself, but even she could feel how tense the atmosphere was. Despite how calm both Naruto and the Kusanagi elder were acting, they were both tenser than she had ever seen. The reason for this was quite simple. The fourth member of the table, who was quietly avoiding the gazes of everyone else in the room, his solid black eyes running across the room anxiously as if looking for an exit, somewhat messy black hair flailing about wildly over his head, he tried to ignore his current company, one of his fingers tapping anxiously as he looked like he was on the verge of crying in frustration. Not that Naruto was any better, as sweat dripped down his forehead, doing his best not to glance in Godu's direction, something made substantially harder by the fact they were sitting across from each other, only the small glass coffee table separating them. No one in the foursome missed the atmosphere, not even Godu, and with how dense he was at times, only proved just how tense the situation really was. A glass clinked on a fine china plate as Shizuka set her half-empty cup on the table, nervously smoothing out her skirt before she stood up. "You'll have to excuse me, I have to do my share of the chores," the brunette announced before she marched her way to the door, sliding the door open. "Oh, and it's nice seeing you again, Naruto," as she walked through the door, sliding it shut behind her. A few minutes later, Aikairu excused himself from the table, a twinkle in his eyes as he shut the door behind him, leaving the two boys alone, both uncomfortable as they simultaneously fought the urge to squirm, as the sense of solitude closed in. The blonde didn't know what he was expecting when Godu gave a deep sigh, but he definitely wasn't expecting what happened next. "I am sorry, Naruto." Cobalt eyes blinked blankly, similar to that of a computer having trouble processing something. Before the blonde could really formulate a response, the words spilled out of his mouth. "What?" It wasn't a mocking question or even a thought-out response. It was in all simplicity the first thing that popped into the blonde's mind. "I am sorry," Godu restated sadly. I shouldn't have said what I did that night. I shouldn't have broken your nose. I shouldn't have blamed." Stumbling over his words, Godu licked his lips. "I shouldn't have blamed you for Aunt Chio's death." Silence pervaded the room as thoughts raced through Naruto's mind like a fleet of runaway ships. But one of those thoughts made its way through his lips as he spoke. "I forgave you a long time ago. A very long time ago. I was just waiting for you to share the sentiment." The quiet stuck the room like a bad smell, just as it had previously, both boys giving the other incredulous stares. Neither knew how long it was before they began to chuckle softly. But soon that soft chuckle turned into a quiet laugh. Before it was loud manic cackling as they both realized what idiots they had been. It was that night they both knew everything between them was going to be just fine. The next 2 weeks of winter vacation were spent with family get-togethers and friendly games of baseball. As they enjoyed their time together, each of them agreed that the break had been much too short. As soon they were sending Naruto off on his way back to school, eventually at least, as he had to do some sort of errand for Ichiro, delivering an old artifact to a shrine that had requested it. It wasn't like delivering an old spear to some shrine in the middle of Sweden would be much of a problem, so the blonde Kusanagi had agreed to deliver the weapon. Not like sending a 12-year-old to country where he didn't even speak the language couldn't possibly go wrong, right? Right? Yeah, he was screwed. The feeling of the plane slamming into the ground woke the blonde from his dreams, or as he would call them, nightmares. They would start out nice enough with him sitting in the arms of what he assumed to be Naruto Yoshida's mother as she sung him a lullaby, her warmth causing the much younger version of himself to drift off into sleep, only to wake up surrounded by villagers, their pitchforks making wicked shadows in the orange light. Then they would proceed to torture him. He would panic, cry in pain, beg them to stop, but they would just laugh with a corrupted glee as they stuck a knife into his already shredded thighs. Somewhere in his mind he acknowledged the fact that most of dreams were fabrications and hadn't actually happened. But another part of him also acknowledged the fact some of them were true. No, it doesn't matter anymore, he told himself, shoving the panic and confusion down as he took a deep breath. I am not there anymore and they can't do anything to me anymore. Wiping the cold sweat from his brow, he stood up, brushing off his pair of black pants, as he did the same to his dark green blazer and open collar button-up shirt hiding underneath. The blonde sighed. He may hate being all dressy, but he wanted to make an at least somewhat good impression. He wouldn't have chosen this if the shrine that was buying the spear from his uncle wasn't supposedly very formal, as Ichiro had told him when he gave him the set of clothes. It wasn't like it did much anyway, considering it was winter and he was going to have to put his 60-pound Godu had actually waded over the break winter coat over it. Now that he thought of it, Ichiro had given that to him as well, and it was dark green too. Was his Gramps trying to give him a signature color? His eye twitched. Definitely sounds like something had do, was his annoyed thought as he followed his fellow passengers out of the plane, slipping on his abnormally heavy coat as he walked. Now that he thought about it, wasn't really a winter coat considering he would wear it in the middle of summer. It was more of an all-year-round coat. Wait, why the heck was he thinking about coats? Ignoring that line of thought, he gave a glance around the airport terminal, having made his way off the plane without noticing. He gave a sigh when he realized his ride was late. Resigned to waiting, he went and sat at one of the many chairs decorating the somewhat cliché airport. He reached into his pocket, pulling out an old MP3 player. He proceeded to ignore the rest of the world. The MP3 player wasn't anything special, had even gotten a new MP4 from Shizuka this Christmas, but he didn't want to lose it or get it stolen, so the blonde kept it in his duffel bag. Now that he thought of it, he must have looked quite strange, with the big duffel bag on his back, accompanied by a large package longer than he was tall wrapped in paper, and strapped to his back. Considering the fact he was 12 just made the picture even more ridiculous. Wasn't like he cared, and in the end it would just make it easier for the people the shrine was sending to find him. He proceeded to close his eyes, and focused on his music as he waited for his ride to arrive. A sense of timelessness invaded his body as he jolted to his feet, eyes shooting open as he observed his surroundings. Everything around him was frozen as he looked around. A girl on the other side of the room had frozen mid-trip. A cup of hot coffee held still as it hung in front of her companion. A grandfather frozen in the middle of a call, a child stuck mid-hop as he gestured emphatically his mother. What the hell? The blonde thought as he slowly grasped his surroundings, moving forward, slowly scanning the airport around him as he moved through the mass of people seemingly frozen in time, dodging through frozen objects and people. A girlish giggle came from behind, and scaring the blonde into the air like a scared cat, spinning around fast enough that even he knew he probably should have gotten whiplash. The blonde was met with bright emerald eyes. It was a girl with pink hair, and oh so bright green eyes shining with a bit of mischief as she giggled into her hand. Her hair was in twin tails with large ruby earrings dangling from her pointed elf-like ears. A smile on her face as she gave him a look that set warning bells off in his head. She was rather young, with a slim figure draped in a strange dress that complemented her already otherworldly look. He almost didn't notice the strange necklace around her neck, as she gave another quiet giggle. Despite this, Naruto couldn't bring himself to think of her as attractive, no, it more like she was beautiful in the sense that he would never be able to touch her, like a piece of art behind museum glass. The blonde was having trouble formulating his words, and just as he managed to get his thoughts straight, the woman spoke. Her voice was soft and alluring as every word seemed to engrave itself into his mind. An impossibility is coming soon. She paused. Do you think you could fix it for me? Before he could stop himself, the words tumbled out of his mouth. Sure? He said in a confused voice, like he was still processing what was asked. She gave him another giggle, having apparently caught on to his confusion. Don't worry, it will all make sense soon. Her green eyes seemed to sparkle as she moved forward. A sense of solidity bit into his limbs as he found himself unable to move. She walked forward with the grace of a cat. A panther about to tear out his throat. As she closed in on his frozen, helpless form, putting a hand on his chest, his breathing ceased as she pushed him away from her, and he descended into blackness. The sounds of the airport poured into his ears as he shot to his feet, eyes open and searching wildly, as his breath turned ragged, only to find himself in the same spot as before. That was it, he must have fallen asleep, he decided. Calming his breathing, he fell back into his seat, ignoring the strange looks the occupants of the airport were giving him as he did his best to merge into his seat. Glancing at his watch, it turned out he'd been asleep a good 20 minutes. Sighing, he ran a hand through his pale gold hair, calming his jumpy nerves. Sinking further into his chair, he allowed his attention to be taken back to the music still blaring in his ears, though he did refrain from closing his eyes, in a small attempt to avoid any more strange dreams. Instead, he voted to keep his eyes on the revolving door, to see if he could spot his welcoming party. A good 4 minutes later, he noticed a man accompanied by a younger woman, both of them in common black suits with white undershirts. The girl, he would admit, could have been cute, or even hot, with long brown hair, a somewhat pale complexion, bright caramel eyes, and lithe long legs, but her shoulders were tense, as if she was ready to fight for her life at any second, each movement stiff and disciplined. Basically, her body language said her personality was almost the exact opposite of the blonde's carefree attitude. The man next to her was obviously playing the bodyguard role. He was somewhere around 6'5", blood-red hair and glowing blue eyes that scanned the crowd in a meticulous fashion. A lump in his suit told the blonde he was packing a gun of some fashion in a shoulder holster, and a glimpse of a handle in his shoe told him the man had a knife of some sort. But the worst part was that the duo was heading straight for him. This was his previous lives' Uzumaki luck rubbing off on him, wasn't it? Sighing in exasperation, he stood up and motioned for them to hurry up as he slung his duffel bag over his shoulder, doing the same action with the spear in a much gentler fashion. Hey, he didn't want to break the stupid thing. As the duo finally stopped in front of him, a sense of foreboding washing over the room as the blonde sighed mentally. Why'd I feel as if I just walked into the viper's nest? Alexandra mused that her day had been fine. She gave a smile as she spun her brand new spinny chair, giving a delighted giggle as she spun around and around. If any of her coworkers saw, they would have had her admitted to an asylum of some sort. After all, a laughing Alexandra must surely be an omen of the coming apocalypse, but that was fine. After all, the Alexandra Olsen, who was currently giggling in her chair, must have gone insane, but she didn't really care that much at the moment. After all, she had just been promoted to representative of the Swedish Dragon Shrine. It was her dream come true. She could feel the excitement bubble up in chest, so intense she almost squealed in excitement. Before she could completely lose control of herself, she took a deep breath in and out. She felt her normal calm overtake her as her pretty features were once more masked with a polite, if impassive, smile. She gave herself a look in the mirror mounted on the wall of her new office. Lately she had let her brown hair grow out, as it was now down to her shoulder blades, her caramel eyes shining with a disciplined light, her snow-white skin complementing her already light features. Luscious pink lips, and almost aristocratic features, made her a beauty, something her expression did nothing to lessen. A momentary deadpan broke onto her features. If anyone ever heard me say that, they would think I'd been spending too much time with Blandelli. That blonde menace was a terror when she wanted to be. Especially when it came to makeup, which is quite strange considering the brat doesn't even use any. Alexandra shook her head, dispersing the thoughts of the 11-year-old in the process. She needed to collect herself. Sure, she had made representative, but she still had a ways to go before she reached her goal of being the shrine director. Yes, just one step closer. No need to lose composure, Alexandra thought, straightening her leggings. She was just dressed in a somewhat expensive pantsuit, black in color with a white button-up dress shirt underneath. A ding came over the intercom as a bland male voice came through. Alexandra, Mr. Arman is here. Asterisk wonder what he wants. Dennis Arman. A large man of 6'2", black hair, black eyes, and currently her boss. Send him up, Dylan. Now that she thought about it, was strange for him to check in with the secretary at all. Sure, being the shrine representative required a great deal more responsibility than people thought, but that wasn't that big of a surprise. After all, the shrine was a large part of the Black Saber Association, and while they were small, they were still a mage association. It wasn't strange that they got a lot of backed up paperwork, but none of this explained why the leader of the association was meeting with her. Her caramel eyes were dark, no black with fury. That rat bastard was blackmailing the shrine. Justin Merriam, the man who had been supporting the Black Saber Association for the past 30 years through donations to the Dragon Shrine, was threatening to remove all support. It was a nightmare, beyond comprehension. She had just gotten her new position, and this man was basically saying he would leave them to the wolves should they not follow his orders. Without his support, they would crumble, in a matter of a few months, a year at most. The Black Saber Association would be overrun by the Silver Wolf Committee. Everything she had worked for would be nothing but dust in the wind should they deny his request. In the end, the request was more of whim than anything. He just wanted some ancient unnamed spear that had been used to kill a few dragons. A manageable request, something they had managed to do in a few hours, but he also wanted them to conduct a strengthening ritual that would imbue the man with the power of the spear, something far more difficult, and of very dubious legality. The man also insisted that it had to be done within the next 36 hours, due to some never-before-seen fluctuation in the ley lines, that would cause some sort of interference after that point. Alexandra didn't care. Ritual magic was never her forte in the first place. She much preferred her combat magic over such time-consuming and overly generalized magic. It wasn't like the payout was ever actually worth the work in the first place. She blew a lock of hair out of her eyes in irritation. Stupid wind. Not only were they being blackmailed, but the person who held the spear had an amazing reputation for finding rare artifacts. The man had never discovered or been informed of magic, but he had probably seen more grimoires and lost tomes than any mage on the planet, with the exception being the Witch of Sardinia. Needless to say, the association wanted to leave a good impression for any further business that might transpire between the two parties in the future. A deal had yet to be made, and the person who was delivering the spear was supposed to negotiate a price. She was to be the one negotiating in favor of the shrine that the owner believed to be buying it. She was to provide the necessities for as long as the negotiations took. In the end, Merriam was even providing the fund of which they were supposed to buy the spear, and considering it was a priceless one-of-a-kind work, well, she was given a lot of breathing room. But Alexandra didn't really care about that. No, it was the fact he had forced her to bring along this brute of a bodyguard. The man barely spoke, and when he did, he most certainly wasn't Einstein either. He also didn't seem to be getting what she meant when she told him not to steal the stupid spear. Even Merriam had agreed that angering this Kusanagi fellow would not be a good idea, if only for the risk it would put on any further transactions. It was precisely this reason Alexandra Olsen was fuming. This idiot would no doubt cause the negotiations to collapse. Not that she let these feelings show, of course. No, on the outside she looked positively impassive, like a truck could hit her companion and she wouldn't have been fazed. Well, her expression might have been a bit cold, but there was no helping that at the moment. The fact that they were currently past the set time for when they picked him up wasn't helping her mood either. Tires squealed as the driver raced down the streets, but time still seemed to crawl by as Alexandra calmly awaited their arrival at the airport. He's just a kid, Alexandra thought with a certain amount of surprise. The blonde rolled his eyes at her as if he had just read her mind, reaching his hand out for a handshake. Instinct kicked in and Alexandra met his hand with her own and shaking 3 consecutive times, before he opened his mouth and spoke, in Japanese. "I am Naruto Kusanagi," he said. Thankfully she knew Japanese and responded in the same language. "It's nice to meet you. I am Alexandra Olsen and I'll be providing you with room and board along with representing the Dragon Shrine during the negotiations." Her tone was polite, her smile warm and welcoming, but the boy didn't seem to buy it, even as he responded in kind. "I hope my stay will be pleasant. This is fun," Naruto thought happily, a Cheshire grin on his face as he looked upon Alexandra's pale face. It hadn't even been an hour since they'd arrived at the shrine, having been swiftly directed into a private room where the negotiations would begin. But in that hour he had managed to get the selling price all the way to 70,000 United States dollars. Why were they using USD? His adoptive father had taken a liking to the currency during one of his travels, Getting the price that high wasn't that hard. All he had to do was tell Alexander that his grandfather wouldn't let him sell the spear for less than 7. What he hadn't told was that he meant 700 United States dollars. The rest was just the girl leading herself to the grave. He just had to reaffirm the fact he wouldn't sell for less than 7 every few minutes, and she dug the hole deeper. Of course, the reason he was putting so much effort into was because Ichiro had promised him at least 40% for negotiations. Of course, the old man thought that he would at most have to pay out 280 United States dollars, not 28,000 United States dollars. In other words, he was being a bit greedy. But hey, he was 12, he had the right to be a bit of a money grubber. Not that it wasn't fun to watch the older woman, she was what, 19, flounder about as he simply took a sip of tea and gave her a stern glare. Heck, that was payment by itself. But the cash was quite a welcome bonus. Chuckling mentally, the blonde took another sip of teas as he watched Alexandra flee from the room, who knew being a negotiator could be so much fun. He thought, cobalt eyes glowing with mirth as they trailed the brown-haired girl as she evacuated the room as if hell was behind her. It's about time I go to bed, isn't it? He thought, looking at the black sky sparkling with the stars. Standing up from his chair, he made his way back to his assigned room, never noticing as one star seemed to shine brighter than the rest. Green eyes opened slowly as they stared out at the sky, silvery hair cut short, as he looked out through the window of his abode, eyes drifting lazily over the stars as he noticed a specific cluster light up, eyes widening as his pupil narrowed, turning into a predatory slit. He gave a wave his hand, his black trench coat billowing slightly as a Mon's form materialized next to him. It was a third-rate mage if you remember correctly. The Mon's tie was haphazardly tied around his neck, a worn dress shirt covered with holes along with a pair of glasses taped together after having been broken several times. Eyes hollow, the man finished materializing with a silent wind. Before giving a bow, the green-eyed man turned his gaze to the puppet. Now, what was it about the stars you were babbling about when we first met? The silver-eyed man asked, a malicious smirk on his face as poisonous chuckle came from his mouth, sending shivers down the spine of everything that heard it, even the dead man. He opened his eyes, sounds echoed through ears as he stared out unseeingly. Naruto hissed in agony as a stabbing pain shot through his skull. Grabbing the source of his pain in hopes to quiet, or at least dull the metaphorical knife buried within his skull, the muted sounds echoing in his ears ignored in favor of clutching his skull as spots of light danced through his vision, he was rewarded with warm sticky sensation. As he pulled his hand in front of his eyes, he could feel his cobalt eyes widening in shock as he stared at his blood-covered hand, staring at the ruby liquid. And wasn't that a pretty color? In a moment of shock, he forced himself to take in his surroundings. The world was bathed in an orange flickering light, courtesy of the flames that now consumed the once beautiful shrine like a hungry wraith. Random bits of wood scattered about along with large chunks of debris now decorating the ground around him. However, he could make out nothing more due to his blurry vision. He could feel his skin prickle under the heat of the unnatural flames. Naruto's blue eyes scanned his body for any further injuries. The blonde gave a sigh of relief as he found no serious wounds other than a few bruises. Sitting still, he waited a few seconds for his senses to clear, a faint sense of relief encompassing him as they returned to him, only for him to nearly choke, as screams assaulted his ears like dull razors. Not your typical razors either, some part of his mind complained. A part that had already embraced insanity. As the sound of the recently mad tore away at his ears. No, these razors just happened to be dipped in acid as well. All the while howls of some great beast, and a roar of some epic monster grated on his ears even formed this distance. Tears clawed their way from his eyes as he grabbed the nearest thing that could possibly make it easier to stand. That item just so happened to be the spear he had agreed to sell no less than 8 hours beforehand. With an tired grunt, the blonde had managed to stand. Despite the fact he had no wounds, he couldn't help but feel like he was weakening by the second, something proven when he struggled to even move. He moved forward in a feeble motion with his impromptu cane, making an awkward clunking sound echo out with every step. It was not even 4 feet before he tripped on a rock, crumbling to the floor along with his makeshift cane. It was a lucky thing too, as a black figure sailed over his head and into the wall behind him. Idly glancing at the now rubble-covered figure, he couldn't help but note the silver-gray hair and distinctive trench coat now in tatters. What was his name again? Vobine. That was strange, he couldn't remember. Not that it really mattered at the moment. Heck, he hardly recognized the man as the rather imposing figure he had met. Because he had met the man before, right? Previously, The man before him looked like he could barely hold consciousness, let alone kill the beast he had summoned. Serves him right, the blonde, though not really caring that the old man was his only hope for survival, though that was probably the head wound's influence. In a slow sloth-like movement he was finally able to stand, with the help of the spear. Once more, pushing himself forward, the blonde went on in a random direction, the clacking sound lost amongst the screams. He went on for what seemed to be days as slowly he stood on his own, the spear still grasped firmly in his hand. He didn't really know why he kept the spear. It would have been far easier to move if he dropped it, but something told him he'd be needing it very soon. Naruto walked forth, not bothering to stop as he passed by. People giggling insanely, or even the people crying for help, hands outreached as they begged him. Don't misunderstand, he wanted to help them, he wanted to make sure everyone was okay. But something was calling him further into the shrine's ruins. Something was calling him, telling him that it wasn't what he was supposed to do. He wasn't supposed to help these people. No, that was someone else's job. No, Naruto had something much more important to do within this destroyed shrine. And he believed it, even as he got closer and closer to the inhuman roar, the terrifying source of the screams. He still believed in what the voice was telling him. However, along his path he did find some solace. As he marched forward, the spear in hand, he heard a faint humming noise. Halting, Naruto scanned the wreckage, blue eye glowing with relief as he found the source of the sound. It was a small rectangular device, emerald green in color. As the humming sound came from the headphones plugged into the device, it was his MP3 player. Most wouldn't find this very comforting as he fumbled with the headphones, managing to finally push them into his ears. Normally Naruto would agree that playing with an MP3 player when a heretic god, that was she called them anyway, was wreaking havoc to the area around you, was what was he thinking about again? Was stupid. But at the moment all he cared about was that he couldn't hear them anymore. The screams silenced as the music drowned out all the noise around him. No longer were the sounds playing with his sanity. As he finally continued on his path, Naruto stumbled over the debris and crawled through the massive amounts of destruction, marching on for what seemed to have been hours when he came across the place where it had all started. The courtyard that had once been filled with greenery and a sense of wonder was now nothing more than a devil's playground. Dead bodies littered the stone floors, a pleased look on their faces, having been granted some sort of reprieve from the torment around them upon death. Others simply laid on the ground, demented smiles on their faces as the being's mere presence grated away at their minds. Then there was the sparse few who had managed to retain both sanity and life, most of them sobbing messes, or frozen in some blank state, unable to understand or see the carnage laid out before them. In the center of this hell, what was hell again, was a large green dragon. With eyes, bringing forth the memory of blood-red eyes, on gigantic fox colored like rust, of fiery ember. Enjoying the terror on the face of the child, it was tormenting as it tossed her back and forth like a cat with a ball of yarn or a particularly interesting mouse. Several small, tiny, insignificant, irrelevant cuts adorning its body as it showed them off as trophies, from its short encounter with Vabon. That was his name, right? A ring of thorny spikes around its head like an infernal crown, its leathery wings pulled against its back as it played with its food. What bad manners. The blonde walked forth, stealthily navigating the blood. Where did all this blood come from? Covered courtyard, his presence remaining unknown to the dragon. Several fires granting a glowing light to the blonde as he got a closer look at the child the dragon was toying with. He recognized her. Yes, he had met her earlier that day, in the garden. Why did that seem like so long ago? Never mind, that's not important. What was her name again? Mina something. Naruto forcibly dispelled his errant concussion-caused thoughts. As he gave the situation a closer look, the dragon's muscles rippled under its skin as it tossed the girl back and forth. Her sobs only increasing its amusement. However, the dragon grew increasingly frustrated as she stopped responding to its attempts at causing her distress. Mina was in a state of panic, her eyes wild, the insanity growing every second. As she looked around for what the blonde didn't know, the flawless look she had maintained when he had first met her had been long abandoned. Her hair was now matted with blood and dirt, eyes puffy and red as tears marks scarred her face, her once pristine dress now in tatters, several small cuts decorating her body like a twisted Christmas tree ornaments. That is a weird thought. However, the girl seemed to be acclimating to her current position, as each attempt to further her misery was met with less of a result each try. Finally, the two-story tall dragons seemed to have gotten bored with her as it dropped her to the ground. A gut-wrenching snapping sound coming from her ankle as she hit the ground from a full 20 feet in the air. Mina's sob of pain attracted the best further, as it stared at her with what could be considered glee, but it seemed the dragons was still done with using her as its toy, its claws long and wicked as they descended towards the helpless girl. Blood still glistening from its last kill, glinting in the light like liquid rubies. So pretty as they dripped down the dragon's scales like red raindrops. Some part of Naruto's mind told him to wait, to not interfere with the girl's fate, to wait for a better opening, to kill the beast. However, every other part of his mind told it to shut up. Wasn't like anyone wanted its opinion in the first place. Oh great, now he was talking to the voices inside his head. That specific train of thought soon crashed, as rage overtook both his conscious and subconscious mind, pulling him towards a particularly insane thought pattern. Music blasted in his ears. Why are you still listening to this? As he made his choice, he sprinted forward, his feet moving on their own as he charged forward. Years of training allowed him to a ready stance, purely on instinct, just in time to take full advantage of his built-up momentum, his feet making an almost silent squishing noise as he thrust the spear forward into the dragons behind. The spear was a somewhat typical boar spear, the blade in its bay leaf design, two lungs, or wings in place where the blade was attached to the shaft, although upon looking closer, the wood used was a bit stronger than normal, and the spearhead was larger than usual, making it much closer to a bear spear than a boar spear. Wait, why the hell am I thinking about this? Naruto asked rhetorically, as he thrust the spear forward only for the spear to glance of the dragon's steel-like scales. The fact it even drew a drop of blood was a testament to the blonde's strength, considering each scale was about as strong as a bar of steel. It however had the desired effect, as the dragon's claws stopped a few sparse feet away from the sobbing Mina. The dragon's ember eyes instead turned to Naruto, its teeth still shining with the gore, red and oh so pretty, of its last kill. As it hissed at him, its tail swinging wildly behind it as it bared its teeth, the orange light glinting of its emerald hide like tiny gems. A glance of wind blew through the clearing, bringing with it a fresh blanket of snowflakes, as the dragon's tail whipped towards him. A sickening crunching sound echoing through the clearing, as the emerald appendage smashed into his ribs. His last thought before he was sent flying was in the end quite simple. Maybe I should have thought this through. His world was turned into a blurry mess as he tumbled through the air, his body flailing about like rag doll, his flight ending soon after as he crashed into a storage shed, the wooden building collapsing under the force of his momentum as he crashed through the wreckage. Naruto gurgled out a short cry of pain. His body twisted in agony as metaphorical daggers stabbed every inch of his body, a coppery taste leaking ever so slowly into his mouth. His mind consisted of little or more than mush as he sat up, despite his body's cries of protest. Wincing slightly as he did so, he refused to look at his torso. The warm sticky sensation coming from what remained of his ribs was enough to know he wasn't in very good shape, but Naruto still willed himself to stand despite the pain that crawled through his body as he did so, some of his life blood slipping down his arm as he grasped for the spear. His MP3 player, no more music for you, left little more than a shattered mess next to it. The spear was in much better in comparison, its worn shaft of ebony wood not even showing a new scratch. As he picked it up, the feeling of the weapon in his hands was comforting as he looked at the spearhead, fresh blood present on the spearhead. The weapon itself seemed to give air of joy, like it was happy to have drawn blood once more. A new sense of strength enveloped the blonde as he climbed out of the wreckage, his spear now glowing a light blue color as he scanned the courtyard. Blood soaked the stone that made up the ground. Anything that was previously occupying the courtyard appeared to have fled with the now absent Mina. The dragon was expressing its thoughts on this fact through loud guttural roars, the very earth shaking beneath its feet, as it let out a gout of flames, turning the rubble around it in molten slag, instantly and momentarily lighting up the courtyard with the power of a sun. The heat of its breath was so hot that the blonde could feel his skin prickle under the sudden warmth. Considering the fact there was a 60 or so foot gap between him and the dragon, he really didn't want to be on the other end of its mouth. Now that I think of it, isn't this courtyard a little big? He wasn't wrong either, considering the courtyard was about the size of football field. Why the hell does this shrine need such a large fucking courtyard? He voiced his incredulity aloud, not caring that his outburst had caught the dragon's attention, although that might have been the concussion talking again. The dragon growled as its eyes landed on his beaten but still living form. the firelight causing the scene to be all the more intimidating as the snow drifted down from the heavens, viscous red liquid glistening on its teeth, as its muscles tensed beneath emerald scales like a lion about to pounce. Naruto felt the spear vibrate in his hand as power was force ably funneled into his body. He didn't know where it was coming from, but he thanked whatever twisted deity that decided to help him. The great serpent shot forward like a bullet. As it cleared the distance between it and its prey, Naruto did the same, charging forward, uncaring of his wounds as the pain seemingly faded within his body. The reptile gave a roar of dominance as it met the blonde in battle, Naruto following its lead, without thought, as he gave one of the strangest battle cries of all time. Stabby. His mind already too far gone, lost in the exhilaration of battle to care about his strange battle cry. The dragon's claws shot forward in preparation to skewer the blonde as they swept forward in a wide, sweeping motion. The blonde retaliated by swatting the claw aside with his spear, blood pumping through his ears as if someone nearby was playing a drum, his muscles finding new strength as energy was pumped into his body from the spear, before the spear took the energy back. The world blurred into a mesh of flesh and steel as he shot a thrust towards the serpent, the emerald scales he had struggled to even scratch beforehand, now being bypassed with seeming ease, the blue glow strengthening as the spear hummed, louder light glinting off the bloody steel. He didn't think as he smacked the beast's jaws aside. No, he couldn't think as he fought on. No thought was involved as the blonde's body reacted on its own, sending a flurry of thrust towards the dragon. But he was human, a mistake was inevitable, and one mistake ended it all. A spine-shivering squelch overcame, clearing his body, going numb. The cold invading his body as he looked down, the dragon's claws, wicked and sharp as they pierced his body. However, there was no pain. That's strange, thought the blonde as he looked up, paying little to no attention to the blood spilling from his body. The great serpent was capitalizing upon his newfound immobility, as it reared its head back, preparing another gout of flames of which it would release upon the blonde. A sense of resignation washed over the blonde. He was resigned to his death, content with the fact he had managed to save Mina. That was her name, right? And the other people in the courtyard. But his moment of content came to a short end as he met the beast's eyes. As he saw the amused cackle glinting in its eyes, he knew the dragon had been toying with him. It was amused at his newfound resignation. For the dragon, this hadn't been a fight to the death. No, this was just a momentary game it was playing to amuse itself, a game of blood that it had won with little to no effort. The sense of resignation was forced to the ground as it was ripped to shreds. He grasped on the spear, tightened as he switched to an overhand grip. No one, he thought, watching as the dragon brought its head down, an infernal light that sent shivers down his spine leaking from its mouth. And I mean no one. The blonde raged as the spear's soft blue light turned to a radiant and blinding royal color. Messes with Naruto fucking Kusanagi. The dragon let the flames fly forth, just as Naruto threw the spear. The spear flew through the flames even as Naruto screamed in agony, his body and mind set ablaze by pain. Yet the blonde's aim was true as the spear shot forward, tearing through the dragon's upper jaw and lodging itself in the dragon's brain. Yet, being in the possession of Naruto, it didn't stop there as the radiant blue light expanded with an intensity that would blind the average human as it released a concussive, world-shaking boom. Well, that was loud. The blonde was thrown off the dragon's blood. Hey, that's mine. Stained claws, his form barely recognizable as human. The explosion sending Naruto's mangled body crashing into the storage shed once more, the darkness consuming his vision, while blinding pain stole his thoughts as he tried to think. I am going to die, was his last panic thought before he passed into the black. Naruto felt just a bit tired, actually, considering the last thing he could remember was being burned alive by a 2-story tall dragon. He was probably lucky to be alive at all. I should probably get up, he thought mournfully. Whatever the hell was sleeping on was heavenly. It like cuddling with a cloud, as he was wrapped in a blanket of sunlight, warm and welcoming arms wrapped around him, another coming through his hair slowly in a comforting motion. His eyes snapped open as he found himself lying in the arms of a certain pink-haired girl. He practically flew out of the girl's arms as he stood a ready pose, his face red with embarrassment, his mind not even registering the fact he was literally standing in a pure white space. The pink-haired girl just blinked as she found her arms suddenly empty, only to look up and giggle as she saw his red face. Who are you? He asked, shoving down his embarrassment. The girl's giggle turned into a full-blown laugh. completely unfazed by the fact she had just been letting a boy she didn't even know use her boobs as pillows. However, it seemed she decided to give the flustered boy a bit of mercy. "I am Pandora, the all-knowing woman. Or at least that's my title," she finished with a cheerful smile. "And you are my son." Naruto blanched as he stared at the girl. "I'm pretty sure you aren't my mother." The girl just rolled her eyes. "You have killed a god, therefore you're my child," Pandora stated petulantly, as she pouted in a very adorable fashion. Naruto could immediately see the parallels between Ayame Ichiraku, Shizuka, and this Pandora. The main similarity being he couldn't say no any of them. He felt any resolve crumble before the girl's cuteness. His mouth opened against his own will as he slammed his jaw shut, only for his last act of defiance to turn to dust as he saw the tears at the edge of the pinket's eyes. Damn my weak will." "Okay, mom," he said, practically choking on the word. The last time he had called anyone mom was sometime before the accident when he was 4, but the effort was worth it as the girl's tears disappeared as she shot to her feet, an ecstatic smile on her face as she practically tackled the blonde. "Finally one of my children recognizes me," she cried out joyfully, as she proceeded to crush the blonde in a hug. The blonde in question simply sighed, having expected this reaction to some extent, opting to just return the petite girl's hug. It was rather nice. Now that he thought about it, hadn't he seen her somewhere before? "Wait, weren't you the girl at the airport?" The pinkette nodded into his chest, her hair flailing wildly as she did so. He waited a few more seconds in silence, hoping she would elaborate further, only to realize she wouldn't be doing that anytime soon. Finally he took a bit of time to look at his surroundings, only to find that he had been standing in an endless white void. How the hell did I miss that? A sweat dropped going down his face as his eyebrow twitched. Mom, where are we?" he asked. The girl pulled away from their embrace as she chose to sit on the ground instead. "We are currently in the boundary between life and immortality," his surrogate mother stated as she patted the ground beside her, beckoning him to sit with her. Sighing in exasperation, he chose the path of least resistance. Sitting next to his new mom, this is gonna take some getting used to, he thought, only to be interrupted as Pandora continued. "You however would probably know it better as the place right before the afterlife." The blonde blinked rapidly. "Huh, so I guess I did die." Pandora smiled cheerfully. "Yep," she said brightly before her face turned slightly more serious. "Thank you for getting rid of that troublesome impossibility as well." Now that he thought about, he did agree to fix her problem for her. "Well, I said I would. And Naruto Kusanagi doesn't break his word." The petite goddess giggled into her hand. "So," the maelstrom paused. "What does this mean for me?" he asked, somewhat lost. "You have killed a god and therefore become an illegitimate child of witch and a fool," she said happily, a graceful smile on her face. The blonde however was only more confused. "Yes, you've said that before, but what do you mean I've killed a god?" The pink-haired girl blinked before her face took on an O formation. "I didn't think you'd forgotten that much," the girl said sadly. Truth was, Naruto couldn't remember anything at all of the day had been having before he woke up in the pile of rubble. Sure, there was brief flashes of the Vobine or whatever his name was, and some scattered conversations, but that was it. He must have been able to remember it before when he was killing the dragon. After all, had called the dragon a heretic god. But that dragon couldn't have been a real god, could it? The young goddess sighed, as she looked towards the blonde. "The dragon you killed was a subspecies of what human call heretic gods," she stated with some of her previous cheer. "Is a subspecies because it wasn't a heretic god yet it was at the same time." Pandora paused as if to think about the best way to explain it. A god is a conglomeration of human belief, or a mishmash of different stories. For example, the god of victory, Varithrania, has some aspects of Hercules' legend inheriting his immense strength. But at the same time, Varithrania is a different god than Hercules. "Never mind, I am probably just confusing you," the goddess sighed, basically through some quirk in the ley lines. "And a never-before-seen arrangement of stars, a variant was summoned, which was the actual goal my other son had in mind when he summoned the god, or dragon as you call it. However, he bit off more than he could chew, as you mortals say, as instead of summoning a somewhat stable heretic deity, he called a completely unstable existence that the very world was denying harshly. The serpentine god was the embodiment of an actor, a concept." The girl nodded along with her own explanation. "The god in question embodied two concepts, or if four if you look at it another way. The insane beast represented the undying hero, and the unkillable serpent. Or in more frank terms, the hero who slays the dragon. And the dragon who kills the hero, the being obviously favored its dragon form. However, that was not by choice. You see, the world was literally doing its best to erase the being, consequently driving it insane like most heretic god, and further offsetting its already fragile existence. A contemplative look on her face as she continued, the deity would have actually died whether you killed it or not, as it would have only been able to hold its existence together for about an hour and a half, so it would have only been in existence for another 30 or so minutes, if you hadn't killed it. A cheerful smile reformed on her face, eyes glowing emerald as she gave him a thumbs up. Congratulations on saving the shrine from incineration, by the way. What do you mean incineration? Naruto yelled at the tiny goddess. Well, once the dragon ran out of time, the mass amount of energy that made up its being would have destabilized, before being released in a massive, and very colorful explosion, Pandora announced in a manner not unfamiliar to that of a person talking about the weather. He could feel his eye twitch at the amount of things wrong with that one sentence, but he took a deep breath, calming himself down as he asked another question. So what happens to me? He asked, resigned that he would never be able to associate the word normal with his life. The goddess blinked. You go back, she said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. But I thought you said I died. What, was she going to shove him in his corpse or something? Well, he had killed a god, so that was probably fair. You did. The goddess didn't seem to get his point, as she suddenly sat upright. Oh, looks like time's up. She seemed sad as she said this, her eyes losing a bit of their cheerful sparkle. But before then I must give you your gift. Yes, you did as I asked after all. The holder of certain very dangerous box nodded to herself. Her hand reached out as she suddenly put her hands onto his chest right above his heart. He winced as burning sensation broke over his chest, jumping away from the true deity as fast as he could. The goddess didn't seem to be fazed as the boy jumped away from her grasp. ID explained further, but you probably won't remember anyways. The girl sighed as she gave him a wave. For a split second he wondered why she was waving, only for his question to be answered as the world turned black. 5 people scattered across the globe suddenly looked up to the sky as if sensing something. One was calculative as he was jolted awake, shuffling the rubble off his tattered trench coat as he stared at the night sky. A sense of disappointment echoing through his head as he sensed his prey fade away, no doubt killed by this new factor. A second paused in the middle of a kata, sweat only just dripping down her brow after the 1000th repetition, before the new development was ignored like a particularly annoying fly, in favor of continuing her warm-up. The third looked up from the ground, her walk disturbed by the momentary brightening of a certain star cluster, only for her focus to be brought back down to earth as something drew her attention in. Walking forward, she took a peek at a small silver ball floating in midair, only for it to rip open, sucking her into the unknown. The fourth didn't stop his stride, as he glanced at the sky, before disappearing in a flash, a single lightning bolt shooting off in the distance. Thoughts full of ways this new player could be used, or disposed of. The fifth stilled as she was about to take a swig of alcohol she had acquired through less than legal means, thoughts being dragged back to her own ascension. Before she let out a dry chuckle. Took him long enough, she complained before taking another swig of her whiskey. Pain racked his body. His skin felt like it was being sheared off. What's that screaming? Wait, that's my scream. I am screaming. Everything was on fire. Even his panicked thoughts hurt him as he felt air whoosh by. Why am I in the air? He thought, only to crash into something, pain leeching away at his consciousness. Everything was burning, every nerve seared at him, clawing at his mind like cliché B-movie monsters. He could feel the heat ebbing away at his being, scratching away at his soul. Something icy ate at his chest, growing as it coiled around his heart. Why is everything so cold? His mind halted as everything faded from his vision. I am going to die. His thoughts growing sluggish as the black claimed his soul. And with that, Naruto Kusanagi died. Bile rose in his throat, a cold sweat clinging to his body as he fought down the urge to throw up. Slamming his eyes closed, he demolished the panicking emotions that wanted to simply lay down and cry. The emotions that told him to drown inside his self-pity and fear. Forcing himself to think rationally, he managed to calm his ragged breathing. I died, he said, trying to work his mind around the simple fact, but I am still here. His mind bent in several ways that no human could possibly fathom before he managed to stop himself, reasoning that he could drive himself crazy with this thought process at a later time. Upon this, he blinked in surprise when he felt a small amount of pain coming from his left hand, something warm flowing between his fingers. Bring it to his face. He winced as he realized had been clenching his fist hard enough to break the skin. Relaxing his fist, he was faintly surprised to see the small crescent-shaped cuts scab over and disappear almost instantly. Seems like my healing factor got boost. Talk about an understatement. As he finally managed to wrestle himself under control, he noticed a string. Yes, that was the word. It was a sting attached to the back of his mind. As soon as he directed his thoughts to it, information unraveled into his mind. They were his authorities. Don't ask him how he knew, but he did. They were the powers had stolen from a god, his 6 abilities, that made him a king. The word king tasted funny in his mouth as he felt 2 of his authorities pulse in response to the word. He could almost imagine 2 dogs sitting in front of him, wagging their tails, as they begged to play with. He, however, instinctively knew that the second authority was not meant to be used inside of a building you were planning on using in the future. Some childish part of his mind was sad that he couldn't really use the second authority at the moment, but he shook it off as he called upon the first. The blood of the serpent is my claim. I call you forth from the depths of death, heed my call. Forge a crown for my enemies to skewer themselves, vile beast, protect your murderer. The words poured from his mouth, almost against his will, as regal silver plate armor melted into existences around his body. Intricate etchings flowing over the unknown material as a thorny crown was woven into existence on his head. In that moment his eyes glowed a fierce blue as he took on the form of a warrior king. Power circulating around him, as he seemed to give off a sense of being beyond his years. Any normal person would have bowed before him, for he could only be a king beyond such common peasants. However, before anyone could stumble upon him like a cliché anime protagonist, the armor turned slightly luminescent, before it shifted into a simple emerald green jacket that went down to his thighs. Now that he thought about it, was a lot like his 60-pound coat. Although the jacket weighed a lot more than the previously mentioned coat. Something proven when he took it off and set it on the bed, only for the sturdy structure to groan under the coat's formidable weight. The blonde shrugged it off before searching the room for something else to change into. A few minutes later Naruto had found a pair of black slacks and a white shirt. Before he threw them on, slipping the jacket on over his new clothes, he was surprised to find something pushing against his chest from the inside pocket. Letting his curiosity get the better of him, he reached in and pulled out a hat. The hat was flat top, short brim hat that vaguely reminded him of an American cartoon where a cat wore a similar hat. Not really thinking about it, he set the hat onto his head. He could barely tell it was there. Slipping on the pair of sneakers had found earlier, he found them amazingly comfortable for new shoes. The relief of being fully clothed washed over him for a sparse moment, before he remembered his predicament. The blue-eyed blonde currently had no idea where he was, or how he got there in the first place. Remembering the people he had been spending the past 2 days with, and more likely than not, the people who brought him here, had been unusually formal. As such, the blonde forced himself to look a bit more dignified, and in his opinion, utterly failed. Mentally sighing, the blonde was about to open the door, when he felt a twinge in the back of his mind. It wasn't the string. No, it was slightly different, more like something was calling out to him. No begging him to use it, having no real idea on what to do. The string of information having said nothing about this phenomenon. He tugged on the feeling, only to find himself reaching out to catch the spear he had used to kill the scaly bastard, or if what his new mother, boy was that weird, said was true, the conceptual bastard. Laughing slightly at his own joke, the blonde observed the weapon he had used to kill a god. A stray thought entered his mind as he called upon another form of his authority, a wicked spear appearing in his hand as he did so. The entire weapon was a pale bleach white, like sun-bleached bones, the same length as the spear in his other hand. Before he willed the spear to follow his intentions, the wicked spear glowed slightly before he brought the spear he used to commit deicide beside it. The bone-white weapon rippled as he shoved the other weapon inside of it. By the time the process was finished, the blonde had a small bit of sweat on his brow. However, it was a success, as the bone-white spear had become less wild and slightly more refined, taking on a similar look to the boar spear. Deciding it was time, he left the room, reaffirming his previous state of trying to appear dignified. Reaching for the doorknob, he was once again thwarted, as the door was opened by someone on the other end. A woman opened the door. She was young, probably only just hitting her 20s, with soft brown hair, light green eyes, and a light tan taking place on her almost flawless skin. She would have been utterly stunning if it weren't for 2 facts. The first was the glint of fear in her eye, like she was staring at a wild animal that could rip her throat out. Her entire body was shaking like a leaf in a thunderstorm. Heck, from just looking at her he could tell her pulse was skyrocketing. The second was the maid costume she was wearing, Don't get him wrong, he could appreciate a girl in a maid costume. This girl, however, was dressed in a hardcore fetishist maid costume. It was so bad if someone asked him to describe what was wrong with it, he would simply ask what was good about it. That and the fact she was actually scared of something turned any appeal the costume would give into a straight zero. Of course he was 12, so didn't really understand a lot about the opposite sex, but even he knew something was wrong with this picture. Are you okay? His mouth said before his brain had much time to work on the thought. The girl flinched. Why, yes, your majesty. The woman said, doing her best not to stutter. As she did her best to address him respectfully, he thought about pressing further for answers but dismissed the thought. As she caught his attention once more, the Marquise has called you to the main room just down the hall. Blinking, he gave a half-hearted thank you before exiting the room. Making a lazy pace into the main room, he was vaguely surprised to find the new shoes surprisingly comfortable. As he walked down the hall, the walling and flooring were a crisp mahogany, the middle of the hallway covered with a red rug with gold accents that no doubt cost more than his gramps had made in his entire career. The hallway lit with old-style electric lanterns that gave it an old-time feel as he slowly passed door after door. The blonde thought it was beautiful, luxurious, something he should never have seen outside of dreams. However, an instinct itched at the back of his mind, telling Naruto that no matter how bright the light, it only made a darker shadow. If how scared the maid was said anything, then the instinct was probably more right than wrong. His shoes padding softly against the carpet as he walked down the hall, passing door after door, until he finally found the end. As he walked out of the hall, he entered what appeared to be a living room, fully furnished with old-style leather chairs. Arranged in front of a fireplace, two older-styled leather couches were set up opposite the two chairs on either side of corner fireplace. Several animal heads mounted on the walls. A flame roaring in the fireplace. A single beautifully crafted end table stuck between the two leather chairs and a worn chess set sitting on top of it. It was a type of meeting room. The couches were put at such a way that if some were to sit in the chairs they were kept in sight, but still allowing them to enjoy the fireplace. The red carpet ending with the hallway is a large dark maroon rug that took up a large portion of this new room. Several large windows allowing one to look out into the Swedish wilderness. Snow clinging to the trees, some of them almost buried in the snow, as elk trodden by unaware of their observers. This view was familiar to Naruto, telling him that he was still within the area of the shrine. The falling sun told him that had slept in quite late. As it was nearing sunset, a single person's form draped over the left leather chair, silver hair, glinting against the firelight, as the blonde moved forward to announce his presence. The tattoo in his left hand burned as soon as he entered the room, however it remained hidden within his skin. Naruto Kusanagi, the sixth king. Naruto halted as the man continued. Tests show his bones have been hardened to that of a dragon bone. His healing rate increased to an extreme. The speed of brain scan shows an enormous leap in activity. Any and all scarring has disappeared, as common for someone who has gone through rebirth as a campione. With the exception of 3 claw marks on his abdomen, he moved forward until he recognized the man in front of him. Reserves of magic have grown to unheard of levels, muscles showing inhuman levels of strength. The man paused, taking a sip from a previously ignored cup of tea. At 12 years of age, the king is the youngest recorded campione to have been born in the last 400 years. The man finished as he slapped a file down onto the end table. Vobin, the blonde said stiffly. Hey, I remembered it this time. Kusanagi, the man returned in a relaxed tone, gesturing towards the right leather chair. Giving a frustrated huff, the blonde joined the elder king. As he sat down in the chair, he almost immediately melted into the surprisingly comfy chair. The duo sat in continued silence, the elder taking the occasional sip of tea. You are taking this quite well, for someone so young, the Marquis stated offhandedly. The blonde raised an eyebrow. Handling what? The older man merely rolled his eyes. Being burned alive, of course. The man said calmly, as if he was simply talking about what he was going to eat tomorrow. I do believe I ended up demolishing the building I was in, before I calmed down. The older man continued. I was much older than you at the time as well, and I do believe the dragon's flames were much hotter than what Apollo was playing with at the time, Vobin said, putting a finger to his chin as if he was giving the thought a deeper look. Naruto gave the man an incredulous look. Don't look so surprised, boy. Pandora's black sacrament is only available through the act of dying to kill a god, the man said as if he was lecturing a child. Relaxing ever so slightly, the blonde responded simply. I figured I could drive myself crazy later. The man paused before nodding like that was a socially acceptable answer. What is a campione? The elder once again paused before he answered. We are godslayers, the Rakshasa Raja, devil kings. We are beings meant to hunt divinity. We are beings meant to rule. We are beings meant to dominate. The wolfish king pointed towards the green-eyed girl, who'd returned sometime during their conversation. If I were to tell her to do something, she would do it. Whether it be to jump off a cliff or to get on her knees and beg like a slutty little whore, it wouldn't matter. She simply would, Vauban said simply, as Naruto's eyes zoned in on the marquis. Are you talking from experience? Thinly veiled disgust in his voice. The conversation, however, continued, even as the girl began to tremble, tears in her eyes. Sasha Vauban scoffed. Such carnal pleasures mean nothing to me. No, I was talking about one of our predecessors. The man had many an unwilling woman in his castle. He of course died shortly after his ascension, having made one too many enemies. Naruto clicked his tongue. So, why has the great Vauban put so much effort into explaining this to me? The blue-eyed boy asked with genuine curiosity hidden by a sarcastic remark. Vauban smirked viciously. Campioni only have one of three types of interaction: either ignore each other, make pacts of non-aggression, or fight till one of them dies. I am simply waiting for you to make your choice, the Devil King announced, his smile completely and utterly manic as he waited for the blonde's answer. The blonde thought through his response, before sighing as he answered, pack of non-aggression, I suppose. The Marquis raised an eyebrow. Also, that's your choice. Did you assume I would simply follow your path? Why should I simply eliminate you like the gnat you are? The blonde couldn't help it as he let out a hearty chuckle. Pulling on some of the information the string had granted him, the blonde readied himself for what he was about to do. Riddle me this, Vauban, the boy said, loosing another dry chuckle. Releasing the massive stores of magic that had been granted to him from his rebirth, the magic flowed out of him, not in a crushing wave, but a mold-able miasma that took form as an aura around him and caused the Marquis to momentarily see a green dragon sleeping peacefully behind the blonde, only for it to snap a single impossibly large eye open, revealing a pool of molten emerald as the boy spoke. What is a wolf before a dragon? Vauban was frozen as the blonde reached over and moved a pawn forward on the chess set. The maid passed out from sheer terror as he stood up almost lazily before the blonde began walking from the room and back into the hallway. However, he halted at the door frame, before looking back at the still frozen king. Your move, Marquis. As soon as he exited the room, his body turned slack. Falling against the door, he pressed his back against the somewhat ornate door that led to the source of his mental exhaustion. He let out a strained sigh, running a hand through hair out of habit. I didn't think negotiations with that wolf would be that stressing. Despite the fact that had only left the Marquis company barely a few hours beforehand, he couldn't help but feel like that conversation had happened ages ago. Of course, the 3-hour negotiating session that came afterward probably had something to do with it. The blonde, however, was just grateful had got an hour-long break before the Marquis had shown up and started a new session. He felt a certain amount of joy when they'd finished negotiations for their pact of non-aggression. In the end, it was rather easy to get the Marquis to agree on his term. But the old wolf still proved to be quite adept at wordplay. The proof of the matter being the terms the old man had weaseled in, none of them being highly unreasonable, but still benefiting the wolf of a man more than the Kusanagi. Needless to say, it was a very hard-fought conversation. Either way, Naruto would need to get up to scratch with his negotiation skills. It was disappointing for a dragon to be outwitted by a wolf, and while the comparison had simply appeared in his mind mere hours beforehand, he rather liked the symbolism, and would prefer to live up to it. He massaged his neck as he pulled his back off of the surprisingly comfy door. Sitting up, Naruto walked to the exit. Pushing it open, he took a deep breath of the chilly noon air. As he walked around, no one really taking notice of him as he walked towards the wreckage of the courtyard. Navigation his way through the mix of buildings that were still in relatively good condition and scattered debris. Stumbling over a pile of demolished plywood, the blonde almost tripped when he finally saw what remained of the overly large courtyard. The once pristine stone that made up the courtyard was stained a rustic ruby color. Large cracks scattered over the ground, several foot-shaped imprints revealing the actions of the dragon, while other parts were made into a weird wavy and uneven texture like it was liquid frozen mid-action. The result of the dragon's barbecue breath, no doubt. Scratches littering the ground, probably from Vauban, but despite the bloody outlines that showed where bodies had been resting, despite the ashes that were still drifting through the air and resting on the ground. Despite this, the most shocking and horrifying thing in the courtyard was the large black stain on the ground. The fire had burnt so hot that the black area had been turned liquid for a short amount of time, before it had cooled, However, within this black spot was an area that had remained untouched and unscathed by the fire. An area in the vague shape of a human. His outline had literally been imprinted into the stone by the dragon's raging fire. An image flashed through his head, pain assaulting his skull as he fell to one knee, his hands slammed down on his ears. His eyes almost rolled into the back of his head. It was a memory of the exact second the fire had washed over his body. Phantom pain enveloped his body. He could feel it as the fire chewed on his skin, a searing sensation coming from his chest. It was over in barely a second as he became aware of his surroundings once more. His breath was ragged as he noticed the cold biting away at his body heat. Despite the fact it wasn't really successful, it brought his attention to the fresh snow that was falling around him. Standing on unsteady feet, a head rush momentarily blurring his vision as he walked forward, he paused when had neared the scorched stone. Kneeling, he ran his fingers over blackened ground. A sound caught his ears as he turned toward the wreckage of the storage shed. It was faint, almost inaudible to human hearing, but it was there. Naruto was sure he wasn't hallucinating as he stood up and headed towards the shed. As he got closer, he could still see a sparse few embers hidden in the debris of the shed. Shoving a piece of the shed's walling out of his way, he could hear it getting louder. Digging into the wreckage, he wouldn't have been surprised if he looked one of those cartoon dogs. It didn't take him long to find what was making the sound as the gibberish became more than just garbled sounds. It was the laughing cat ringtone, as he finally ripped his prize from the mound of dirt and wood, sending a burst dust into the air. Coughing, he waved his hand trying to clear the dust cloud as he redirected his attention back to his reward. It was green smartphone. The screen was large but overly so, with a slightly singed green phone cover over the back. The blonde felt his eye twitch as he realized what it was. "This is my cell phone," he let out an exasperated groan. Don't get him wrong, he was happy to find it still working, if slightly melted, but there was just one problem. How the hell did this thing survive? I get that it fell out of my pocket when I crashed into the shed, but how the hell did this thing survive impact? An impact which had reduced his rib cage to splinters, he might add. He was drawn back from his conversation with no one when the phone rang again. Glancing at the screen, he almost tripped as he read that Gramps was calling him. Oh shit. He screamed mentally as he clicked the answer button. Hi?" he said lamely, only to hear a gasp on the other end. "Naruto. Is that you? Are you okay? Is everything okay?" He had to take his ear away from the phone with how loud Ichiro was asking. Yeah, I am fine. I just found my phone. Could you calm down and explain why you're freaking out?" He was honestly clueless. It wasn't that he hadn't called. Had gone entire weeks without calling, so that probably wasn't the problem considering had only been knocked out for a day. "I am sorry, Naruto. It's just we heard about the terrorist bombing at the shrine you were at, and we were getting worried when you didn't return our call. We were beginning to think. His almost impervious grandfather was practically having a breakdown on the other end, and he didn't have a clue as of what to do. "Old man, you might want to sit down. You're almost acting your age," the blonde said, his own lame attempt at lightening the atmosphere. But it seemed to work as the older Kusanagi gave half-hearted laugh. "Thanks kid, I needed that," Ichiro announced thankfully. "So what going on over there?" The blonde almost descended into a panic. "What am I supposed to say?" Rubbing the back of his neck, he let a nervous chuckle. Everything's fine here. I sorta just woke after being knocked out." He almost smacked himself when he heard his adoptive father take a worried gasp. "Nothing big to worry about. I am perfectly fine. Don't give yourself a heart attack or anything," Naruto said, trying to avoid the time bomb had just dropped on himself. "I won't be giving out any time, brat," the old man said gruffly. "I better go. I need to go and tell Godu and Shizuka that you're fine." Swallowing the part of his mind that told him to keep the elder on the line, the blonde just gave choked up "Yeah, I'll talk to you later." When he heard the clicking sound that typically meant the call had ended, he let his arm go slack, uncaring as his arm dangled beside him. Stupid dragons. Fucking mages. Why can't life be easy? He yelled at the top of his lungs, complaining to nothing. Well then life wouldn't be fun, would it? He turned his. Not particularly surprised to find a bandaged Alexandra staring down at him from a pile of debris. Her clothes somewhat ragged, while her hair was going its best at attempting to imitate a Furby that had been zapped with lightning. And while the bags around her eyes were plainly visible against her pale skin, "Don't apply your logic to me, mortal," he said sarcastically, rolling his cobalt eyes. The brown-haired girl paused as her skin paled even further as she fell into a bow. A black-haired girl that he hadn't seen beforehand following her lead. Oh great, were they taking his sarcasm seriously? "I am sorry I didn't recognize you, Your Majesty," announced the caramel-eyed woman, voice trembling slightly as she tried to pat down her hair. Much too tired, both physically and emotionally, the blonde just gave her a blank stare. It went unnoticed, however, as they just started to shake silently under his gaze, as she continued her speech. "Please do not take your anger out on the shrine. I hold full responsibility, please punish me and no one else." Naruto wasn't even surprised anymore. The girl did seem to be the type to make her job her life, so it wasn't that offsetting she would offer her own life in place of everything she'd accomplished. Naruto, however, was much too tired to even make an attempt at being tactful. "You do realize by doing the whole majesty thing you just made me a lot more angry than simply not realizing my position, right?" It was only when he noticed both women shaking like leaves did he realize that sentence hadn't helped anyone, but once again he was much too overloaded to really care about other people's feelings. "I mean seriously, I am 12, I have no need of an ego boost. Stop calling me majesty or whatever." And now he was rambling just great, although he couldn't help but find her whole idea that he was going to destroy a shrine simply because she didn't realize who he was at sight utterly stupid. Only around 20 people in the shrine knew that he was a campione at all. Thanks to Vauban's interference, most of them simply thought the Marquis had killed the god thingy. Now that he thought about, he should probably do something to maintain his anonymity. Following that thought, he reached inside his jacket pocket, with the simple thought of maintaining his anonymous status. What he pulled out was a simple necklace with a braided cord with a single pendant hanging onto it. He immediately knew what the necklace did. After all, it would be strange that a dragon didn't know the purpose of what it was keeping in its hoard. The necklace by itself was worth quite a bit of money, as the pendant was made of pure platinum, forged into the shape of the Jubi's eye, whatever the hell that was, and enchanted with the specific purpose of maintaining his own anonymity, with a couple of mildly amusing side effects, mostly just driving the stupidly weak-willed insane. Maybe this coming back from the dead thing had affected him a bit more than he thought. The blonde, however, was just increasingly happy that had gotten Dragon's Hoard as an authority. After all, it let him summon valuables, and what could be more valuables than an item enchanted with a forgotten spell? He paid no attention to the girls as they managed to recompose themselves, seemingly realizing he wasn't paying attention to them. Slipping the necklace on lazily, it wouldn't prevent people that already knew he was a campione from realizing it, but it would make it impossible for most others to figure it out without him telling them. His attention was brought back to reality as Alexandra and her company addressed him. Turning to face the girl, he raised an eyebrow. She was wearing the standard garb of the shrine maidens, her hair brown, like Alexandra's, while her eyes remained a much lighter blue than his own, probably a year or two younger than him. Her skin was pale in an unhealthy way, fingers twitching like she was in the sights of a rabid animal. "What did you just say?" The girl seemed to freeze, her breath becoming more panicked. As she played with her hands nervously, she spoke again, her voice trembling and barely above a whisper. Putting a hand up to his ear, "Speak up. I can't hear you." The girl's body looked like it was going haywire as she opened her mouth and screamed at him. What were you thinking when you killed it? How did you kill it? Could I have would it?" The girl stopped holding back tears as she locked her eyelids shut, falling to the stony ground with a thumping sound. The blonde proved himself to be worthy of his title as Epimetheus' child as he shoved Alexandra away and wrapped the young girl into a hug, one hand pulling the girl into his lap as the other was ran through her hair. The girl didn't really seem to care that she was literally being held in the arms of a natural disaster, as she practically crushed him with a hug, patting her back as she sobbed into his shoulder. In all honesty, he had no idea what he was doing, so he just did what he used to do for Shizuka when she was sad. So he sang a song. It wasn't really fit for the situation, but it worked. It was an old lullaby that he could remember his mother from this dimension singing him when he was younger. The only witness to this scene was the 18-year-old Alexandra Olsen, the mournful song echoing in her ears, nature itself seeming to respond to his voice as the snow wrapped the young king and the girl on his lap in a tear-rending embrace. In later years, she would claim this to be the first sign in a plethora of clues that Naruto Kusanagi was no mere human. He was something more, something better, for he was a kind campione, and wasn't that just terrifying? Naruto Kusanagi didn't really know how long he'd been holding the young girl, just that she'd literally cried until she fell asleep. He also wasn't quite sure why he was lugging her around like a sack of potatoes. However, even as the girl drooled on his shoulder, his legs around her thighs as he carried her piggyback style, there was still an upside. What was this ever so small silver lining? In the end, it was the simple action of comforting the girl had resulted in Alexandra loosening up. Yeah, that was probably the best way he could put it. Oh yeah, that, and had found out that the armor of the Slayer was tear-proof. But back to the previous topic, he grunted slightly as he laid the girl down in one of the many unused rooms of the mansion had been sleeping in only a few hours ago. Being Campione had its privileges, and that meant he could literally have huge party. That would destroy the mansion and no one would complain, unless they had a death wish or something. After all, Campione were viewed as biblical monsters that would kill you at the drop of a hat. In comparison, setting aside a room for an exhausted little girl was quite tame when compared to most of the things he could get away with now, but it was nonetheless within his power. Of course, so was setting entire countries on fire, but he preferred to not think of that headache. Despite how well he was adapting to his situation, Naruto still couldn't help but find it odd that his arms weren't the least bit tired. After all, it wasn't an everyday event when a kid could say had just carried a girl the same age as himself for around 2 to 3 hours, with the fact had been tearing into a pile of debris made up of pieces roughly 3 to 4 times his size, just to find his cell phone. The entire situation just became straight up weird. He shrugged, who was he to complain, and left the girl alone in her new room. During the time had been hauling the girl around, he hadn't been entirely idle. From the now relaxed Alexandra had found out that the deal had been agreed upon a few hours before the conceptual asshole had been summoned. As it turned out, it was pure chance that the spear had landed by him at all. Heck, the math stated that the spear should have landed several hundred miles north of the shrine, if it wasn't simply incinerated when the god had landed right on top of it. Had also been informed that the money had already been transferred into his adoptive father's account, and his own respectively. The somewhat vicious smile that appeared on his face as he thought about the subject proved that the greedy aspect of his personality took far too much pleasure in the fact had gotten both the spear and the money. After that, Alexandra had proven to quite helpful with piecing together what had occurred before had woken up in a pile of rubble. As it turned out, Justina Mirist, Jeremiah Mirope, whatever the hell the guy name was, had tried to empower himself with the power of the spear. The spear itself having been an experiment by some long-forgotten Campione, for the single purpose of killing gods and other Campioni. What the spear did to accomplish this was in the end quite simple, but no less ingenious. The spear would steal magic from the blood of said god or Campione, before forcing it into the user, forcibly expanding the user reserves of magic until they were full, and then added the tiniest bit more to stretch them even further. The excess magic was then stored into the spear, had the bonus of repeating the process every time blood was drawn, meaning the enemy would get progressively weaker with each strike, with the added bonus of empowering the user and stretching their reserves beyond normal human standards. However, there was still a problem with this. It may have been enchanted by a Campione, but it was still mortal magic, and thus incapable of even cutting a god without a specific enchantment, something the god Slayer had reacted to by cursing the weapon with one of the few mortal spells that would allow a weapon to at least harm a god. The enchantments, when separate, weren't even a threat to a god. This was where the Godslayer had shown his genius, as when mixed together, the weapon could draw blood from a god, therefore absorb some of the god's magic. In other words, by absorbing divine power, the weapon itself became a divine weapon, and as such it held the power to kill the heretical existence. The explosion of power that turned the deity to dust was just all the power in the spear becoming unstable, since it required physical contact to remain stable. Justine something or another had been aiming to absorb/bind this power to himself, thus making it possible for him to kill a god, Campione. In the end, the man had clearly miscalculated. For one, just because it was possible to kill a god did not mean it was likely. After all, it had been possible to kill gods for several 100,000 years. But there was only 6 or so people that had accomplished it, and survived more than a day afterwards in recent history. It was almost like rubbing salt into a wound when you added the Marquis appearance into the equation, but it was plain old adding insult to injury when Naruto's presence was mentioned at all. In the end, Naruto was an impossibility, a body with a soul and a half. It was only logical that an impossible existence would do the impossible. Right? Of course, the guy hadn't known that the Marquis would barge in right in the middle of explanation of the ritual and why he was doing who knows what with the spear. The brown-haired woman couldn't actually tell him much of anything at that point because, as she put in her ever so eloquent way, "I wasn't paying attention." The blonde let a full-blown grin envelope his face, a few beams of light catching his worn gold hair and his blue eyes sparkling mischievously. "Don't give him that look." You imagine the ever-so-strict girl in your classroom openly admitting that she didn't pay attention to a teacher with a blank face and a slight blush on her cheeks. It was like something from manga, for God's sake. He shook himself from such thoughts. It wasn't the time to laugh at the strict girl. No, at the moment he was going to practice the only spell he knew. It was called instruction magic, and strangely enough he was taught by Vauban of all people. The first king was actually a really good teacher, when it came to magic at least. Of course the man only taught it to Blonde because he didn't want to waste time filling him on everything he was missing. Crazy old bastard. The emerald-wearing Blonde cursed. Learning instruction magic was quite helpful, as it meant that any information he learned through the magic was engraved into his mind, permanently. Having the spell cast on him would have limited the spell, as even though Campione's magic resistance didn't have much of an effect on things ingested didn't mean it didn't have an effect, as the only way to cast the spell on a Campione would be to kiss. The spell would get through just barely, but the information would only be temporary. Of course normal people couldn't use the spell much without risking brain damage, but thanks to being a Campione he could literally use the spell all day long with no trouble. Well, he'd get a headache, but that was it. We Campione are rather overpowered, aren't we? He said, sweat dropping as he realized the possibilities of just this one spell if used correctly. It was just plain common sense that he would be abusing the shit out of the spell too. He was an avid follower of using everything at his disposal after all, when he wasn't being lazy, that is. Thunk. Ow, he complained, holding his nose in pain. Blue eyes flaring with utter hatred at the wall had run into. Far too lost in thought to even notice the wall existed beforehand. Naruto sighed, moving away from the wall and towards his actual destination. He couldn't find it in himself to work up enough irritation to distract himself from his goal. The Kusanagi idly trailed his hand against the wall as he walked, only the sound of his feet beating against the wooden floors. Other than his new ability to engrave information directly into his gray matter, nothing that could be considered interesting had happened. A warm bubbly feeling however forced him to retract that statement. It was a warm homey feeling like had just been hugged by mother, that welled up in his chest, begging to be released, to be let out of its cage. It was such a pleasant feeling that he couldn't stop himself as he pulled on the emotion, the power that was now resting in his chest. The strange tattoo surfaced on his left hand as he put his arm out, palm up. A ball of pure white fire appeared in his hand, glowing with heat as it radiated warmth. Unnoticed to Naruto, his irises had become similar to that of a cinder. That is to say, coal black with veins of fire webbing his eyes, longing to consume all that was around them. The fire slinked its way down his arm, spreading all over his body, wreathing his body in pure white flames, as it flickered back and forth as if pushed by a non-existent wind. However, even as it covered him, spreading over the floor, attaching itself to the expensive carpet, even as it creeped up the walls and covered the ceiling, nothing was burned. Naruto could feel the fire, as it licked longingly at his surroundings. The flames were treating this entire situation as if they were children, their faces pushed up against the glass of a display case of an ice cream shop, pouting in a cute fashion as they asked if they were allowed to have some. The symbol for fire glowing a hot red on the back of his hand. So this is the elemental serpent's authority, he thought idly as he commanded the flames to disperse, even as the unnoticed burning sensation faded from the back of his left hand, the red glow disappearing with it. He could still feel the authority ever so subtly trying to coax him into using the authority's other abilities, to dive in and turn into something beyond human, to become the beast. He could tell it wasn't doing it out of any malicious meaning. No, the authority was closer to a very needy animal, like a dog begging to be played with, or a cat rubbing up against your leg. It was just trying to catch his attention. Lost in thought, the blonde continued on, navigating the many halls of the shrine. An idle glance told him the tattoo had resurfaced. As he commanded it to disappear, responding, it sunk back into his skin once more, random thoughts still hazing his mind, his feet moving with a mind of their own. It was, however, the feeling of a cold wind brushing his skin that knocked him from his mind. This isn't the library, Alexandra sighed, her eyes trailing her Italian companion as she worked the crowd, or at least that was the Swedish native's opinion. The Diavolo Rosso, in all but name, was currently acting the part of young child cheering up the wounded people who had yet to be brought to the hospital, her blue eyes sparkling with something most would mistake for innocence and kindness. Not that the girl wasn't kind or innocent in her own way, it was just that at the moment both emotion were a mere act. What the sparkle represented wasn't a child's innocence, it was much closer to that of an actor appreciating their own talent. The girl wasn't here to be a kind person, she was here to leave a lasting impression. Erica Blandelli was here to implant the idea that the Copper Black Cross was an ally, a trusted organization that was willing to do whatever possible to help. Alexandra had no doubt that Erica held just as much distaste for what she was doing as Alexandra did, but it wasn't the girl's choice. She had no say in this matter. You could even say it was a test for the younger girl, as Alexandra doubted that the prideful girl had lied when she said her papa had thought it would be good for her. She was also quite sure that the girl wasn't here on just the Copper Black Cross's behalf. Of course, she could go on for hours if she wanted to list all the different reasons the girl could have for coming to Sweden, but that was the only one she was sure of. The brown-haired girl groaned into her hands as she rubbed her aching head. All I wanted was a day to relax after witnessing a god descend. But no, she drawled in her mind sarcastically, I had to run into the youngest Devil King. Just on time to watch Audrey to break down. She thought in annoyance, don't even get me started on the headache all of his questions gave me. But of course the annoying Blandelli had to show up just as it was fading. The girl who had been making rather enthusiastic gestures sighed, as her shoulder dropped like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Pulling her knees up to her chest, the brown-haired girl rested her head on them. She wasn't quite sure when Shed sat down on the bench overlooking the mass of people looking for medical attention, but it was welcome nonetheless. Resting up against the wooden backrest, she released a yawn. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out her phone. Flipping it open, her eyes shot open as she realized she hadn't slept in well over 24 hours. An overwhelming dreary sensation overwhelmed her. As her body molded itself into the bench, she knew it wasn't the smartest thing to fall asleep outside in the middle of winter. Her eyes drooping slightly, maybe it would be fine? Was the traitorous thought that shut her eyes completely. Just this once, a cold wind flowed over her skin as the black consumed her. The last thing she heard as her mind exited the world of the conscious was mixed with confusion and no small amount of exasperation. This isn't the library. Erica Blandelli was absolutely sure of one thing as she gave an innocent smile to an old man as he carted into an ambulance. Her face hurt. She hadn't even been here for more than 2 hours and she was sure she had smiled more times in the last 10 minutes than she had in her entire life beforehand. Normally that wouldn't be a problem. Hell, normally she would congratulate herself for doing something like that, but the problem was that every single smile, innocent, mischievous, or superior, they all shared one thing: they were fake. So fake that wasn't sure how any of the people here had bought the act. Don't get her meaning wrong. The Blandelli was quite sympathetic to the people here. A heretic god descending was quite a horrible event, and she most assuredly felt for the people affected. If she wasn't here on an assignment, she would have ended up helping anyway. But she was sent here to leave a lasting impression of helpfulness and innocence, meaning she couldn't act like her normal haughty self. As a result, she couldn't express herself in her usual manner, which resulted in everything she did being at least somewhat fake. To be honest, she absolutely loathed this mission. Sure, there was the secondary mission of scoping out potential mages. After all, it wasn't uncommon to find normal people had become at least potential mages after the descent of a heretical god. She shivered as the cold air brushed up against her. In all honesty, she had no idea how Alexandra could be outside in nothing but a suit. Even with her heavy-duty winter gear, the Crimson Girl could feel the cold bite into her body like a rabid wolf. When had she become poetic? This isn't the library. Erica blinked at the absurdity contained in that one sentence. Her eyes found the source of the sentence almost against her will. It turned out to be a boy around her age, probably a year or so older, dressed in an emerald green coat that went down to his thighs, black pants and a white shirt along with a flat top, round green hat atop his head as he blinked, looking at his surroundings. Only to pause as his eyes found the form of Alexandra Olsen, curled up in a ball on a bench. Erica watched as the boy tilted his head in a manner similar to that of a cat or maybe a fox. As he walked towards the girl, the golden blonde girl had hold back a chuckle as the boy poked at Alexandra. Alexandra? He poked her head. You there? Another barrage of pokes were sent at the sleeping Olsen. Earth to Alexandra? Before the boy let loose a sigh and, she's dead to the world, the boy's shoulders fell as he groaned, much to Erica's amusement. I am going to have to carry her inside, aren't I? The boy mock cried as he mumbled to himself. What is with me carrying girls today? Is it like my calling card or something? He mumbled hopelessly. Maybe it's the theme of the day. He wondered, trying to figure out just why he had to be the one to carry her. Erica withheld a snort as she moved to follow the boy. Alice chewed her lips distractedly as she stared out the window of her room. Seeing as her condition hadn't allowed her to be fully conscious for over 2 months after overexerting herself, she was quite glad to see the warm light of the sun bathe the snow-covered form of England during the winter. However, recent events would not let her sleep. Glancing down upon the red satin sheets that pooled in her lap, The drapes around her four-poster bed opened wide as to allow the sun to warm the room, and to consequently lighten it as so she could read the report in her lap. A manila folder secured around the stray bits of paper clipped together, inked upon the paper was the source of her worries. It was the entirety of what the Wittenijmot knew of the mysterious sixth Campione. It had been almost 4 months since the sixth king had been crowned, and all they had to show for it were 2 measly reports along with several notes that all reiterated the fact that they knew nothing. This wasn't much of a problem though, after all they'd already dealt with the eccentric fifth king, whose identity they still didn't know. What worried the greatest witch among the heavens was the second report, and newest addition to the folder. Wittenijmot report second entry as of today, March 24, 2009. We have confirmed that the first and sixth king have fought in a battle as to confirm their pact of non-aggression. The duel resulted in a favorable draw, with each king reaffirming that they saw each other as equals. Witnesses agree that both kings left on agreeable terms, both kings having followed the rules of the bout exactly, at least according to the witnesses, as they refused to expand upon the subject. A request for further investigation has been sent out by the field agents, in order to ascertain the Campione's identity, as the Black Saber Association has continued to deny any request for more information. Alice sighed as she once again turned her attention back the snowy view of London, hands playing with her golden locks. It was not long before her eyelids began drooping slightly as her frustration took its toll on her already strained body. She however resigned herself to sleep. She couldn't do anything at the moment anyway, her body far too strained to even attempt making a spirit body at the moment, that and a vague whisper in the back of her mind that told her she wouldn't have found anything anyway. It was however in the depth of sleep that she did see a vision of a king, the seventh king, the idiot king. 3 months earlier, giving an explosive sigh, Naruto pushed open the mahogany door that lead into a finely furnished spare room, a 4-poster bed with the curtains drawn open to reveal elegant white silk sheets. Merely shrugging at the lavish room, he shuffled over to the bed, his shoes padding softly against the fluffy gray carpet. Swiftly peeling the silky sheets apart, he slipped the unconscious girl under the covers. The fact that he was only 12 and had just lifted an 18-19-year-old woman like it was nothing didn't even faze him as he tucked her into the cover like Aunt Chio had taught him to do with Shizuka. The brief image of his 8-year-old cousin carrying around a tray of tea painted itself in his mind as he felt both the warmth of happiness and a strange ache surface within his chest. During his self-imposed exile, had missed quite a lot, hadn't he? Far too much. Shaking his revelry away, he slipped down into the single chair present within the room. Sinking into the fairly comfortable chair, he let himself relax into his seat for a moment. He could feel a yawn bubbling up his throat, along with a burst of drowsiness before he shoved the feeling down. Why the heck was he drowsy anyway? Had only woken up like 6 hours ago after all. Maybe it was all the sleeping girls had been carrying. Well, it was only 2, but still, or maybe it was because had been knocked out. He remembered reading that being knocked unconscious was very different from genuine sleep. Of course, there was also the possibility that he was just being lazy. Stretching out in his chair, he let out a long yawn, before deciding that it didn't matter either way. After all, Naruto wasn't going to sleep just yet. He forced himself to his feet. No, he had some research to do on his moronic older siblings. Something that's apparently going to have to wait, again. Why? 'Cause Naruto felt himself unable to fight off the warm, sleepy sensation that had finally pushed its way to the front of his mind, as he crumbled into the chair, his mind overcome with the soft whispers of sleep, and his last memory being a soft giggling noise that was most familiar. Erica Blandelli wasn't all the sure why she had followed the boy, carrying Alexandra. Just the foggy thought that it would be amusing if she did. As it turns out though, it was just about anything other than amusing, if you ignored the boy as he grumbled about carrying sleeping people, that is. Other than that, however, it was quite interesting, or should she say curious, to watch the boy navigate the shrine. After his comment about the northern courtyard not being the library, it should have become quite obvious that the boy was quite honestly horrible with directions. Erica wondered how he even found himself in the northern courtyard, considering it was on the opposite end of the shrine from the library. It was, however, watching some of the servants bow in front of the boy and answering his every question to the best of their ability, like they would treat a valued guest. While the rest of the shrine's caretakers simply shrugged him off like he was nothing but a bother, that gained her interest. When the knight in training asked the servants themselves, they just smiled sadly at her, like she was a toddler about to poke a sleeping dragon, before saying that they couldn't tell her even if they wanted to. That had put her off balance briefly, before she just continued to trail after the boy as he continued to haul around Alexandra, for what must have been almost an hour before he simply put her in a guest room. After tucking Alexandra into bed like a 4-year-old, he shuffled over to the spare chair, present in the room. After a few minutes of idle thought the boy stood up, before he yawned, flopping back into his seat like a blob of jelly, as he entered the realm of unconsciousness. Erica was unable to fight of the urge to facepalm. A cringe-inducing smacking sound echoed throughout the room as the red devil soon rubbed her equally red face, in muffled irritation. Note to self. Do not use full strength to facepalm. Disregarding that thought, Erica took a moment to actually look at the person she had been stalking for the good part of 2 hours. He wasn't anything special, just a somewhat tall 11-12-year-old boy, with a strange emerald hat going over his spiky golden blonde hair, his skin holding onto a sun-kissed tan that meant he was probably foreign, considering the usual pale complexion of the Swedish, his clothes a brilliant emerald thigh-length coat, over a common, unremarkable white t-shirt, and a pair of black pants, a strange necklace glinting in the light, as it dangled around his neck. Her heart skipped a beat. She could feel it, a malevolent presence hanging over her shoulders as it slinked down her form. Then it was gone, disappearing like a shadow in a dark room, fading from the room as soon as it came. Erica Blandelli blinked as she glanced around the room in confusion. What had she been thinking about? Scratching her head in confusion, she shrugged mentally. It probably wasn't all that important. Either way, nothing interesting was happening right now, so she might as well finish her other assignment. Sighing internally, Erica Blandelli set out to see if any of the survivors had any magical potential. Turning around, she marched out of the room, unaware as the strange necklace around Naruto's neck glimmered an unsettling shade of red as she left the room. When Naruto fell into the realm of sleep, he was expecting a dream of some sort. Maybe it would be a typical dream, one those unremarkable ones that faded into the back of his skull, never to be remembered again. Maybe it would be the dream of when he, Shizuka, and Godu were trying to cook a surprise cake for Aunt Shio at midnight. Well, it was mainly just him and Godu cooking, since Shizuka was far too young to cook. She was 4 in this dream after all, so she just stood behind them and supervised. Of course they screwed up eventually, and set the cake on fire in the oven, so Gramps had to rush down the stairs, barely dressed, as he hurried to put out the fire. Then the old man would try and scold them, but before they knew it they'd all started laughing. It was a strange dream and an even stranger memory, but it never failed to warm Naruto's heart. But he didn't get either of those. He didn't even get a nightmare. No, as soon as he fell asleep, Naruto Kusanagi woke up in a strange room. It was a fairly big room, shelves on every wall, and a single record player in the center of the room. The strange thing was that even though every shelf was full of old dusty vinyl records, still in their original sleeves, he couldn't play a single one. None of them worked, and Naruto had picked entire shelves clean, slipping each and every record into place, and setting the stylus into the right spot only for the record to go poof as soon as he turned the phonograph on. If time in the dream world had any effect on reality, then Naruto would be 100 years old, from the amount of time he spent clearing shelves upon shelves of records. No matter what he did, as soon as he flipped the phonograph on, the record went poof. He was being literal too, as each record would turn into smoke with an actual poofing sound and everything. Running a hand through his hair, Naruto finally decided to take a break and sit down on the couch in front of the phonograph. Naruto was really beginning to hate this dream. Sighing, the blonde decided to simply sit here until he woke up. Leaning back into the couch, he basked in the warmth of the fireplace that he was pretty sure wasn't here a few minutes ago. In front of him, reaching out beside him, Naruto was honestly surprised to feel his hand hitting an end table. Taking a bit more interest in his surroundings, only to find the room had shifted around him, a fresh mahogany coffee table with the record player sitting innocently on top. All of the records that had disappeared previously were now once again sitting undisturbed on their shelves. However, propped up against the phonograph were 6 records, and they seemed familiar to Naruto. Reaching out for one of the records, he gasped and almost dropped it. He was expecting the sensation of cardboard against his fingers, only to feel the texture of worn leather brush against his fingers. Pulling the record closer, he looked over it, only to find the sleeve was made of a familiar green substance. A green substance had stabbed several times with a spear, barely a few days ago. That was nothing, however, as he realized exactly what the record was. Naruto's voice, barely above a whisper, as he spoke my authorities, silence enveloping the room, the dream, whatever the hell it was. His moment of silence was ruined when a bright purple rocket smashed into his side, groaning in pain, despite the fact it was a dream and well he couldn't really feel pain at the moment. Holding back a few choice words, he glanced down at the pink bullet that had slammed into his side, only to find the Witch of Knowledge, Pandora, looking up gleefully into his face. Naruto rubbed his forehead. He could feel the distinct throb of pain that forewarned the appearance of a headache. It probably shouldn't have been possible to get a headache in a dream, but he was sure the pink goddess in front of him could manage it. Opening his eye, he stared at the chirpy woman whom had claimed him as her adoptive child. She was sitting there glancing around his dreamscape, mindscape, whatever it was called, in a form of fascination, the shelves upon shelves of endless records, spiking her interest but only slightly. There was a certain amount of familiarity, twinkling in her eyes like when you went to a friend's house, but they'd moved the furniture around. It was interesting and new, but only to a point. Using his hands to push himself further into the couch, which was now a green velvety material, that was another thing. The longer he stayed inside his dreamscape or whatever it was called, the more defined the things around him became. Naruto sat up straight and looked at Pandora. She was sitting across from him, a small coffee table made of some undesirable material sitting in between them, her fingers idly twirling a lock of her violet hair, which was still put into two ponytail, trailing out behind her. The old-fashioned ruby earrings jingling slightly as she turned her head to look about the dream. Clearing his throat, the blonde took the plunge. So, Mom. Pandora's head snapped in his direction, so fast that if she wasn't a goddess she would have gotten whiplash. Just what present were you talking about? Also, while I am asking questions, just where are we? A pleasant smile broke out on the ancient goddess' face. To answer your second question, we're in your head, more specifically a part of your mind, created when you became a Campione, the goddess said, more than happy to explain. You see, when a Campione is reborn, one part of the process shoves a bunch of knowledge and other such things to help the Campione survive. While a lot of this knowledge is lost in the process, most of it remains on an instinctual level. Hardly any Campione ever managed to retain any of this knowledge consciously. Pandora continued on, in her signature chirpy tone, practically bouncing in her seat as she did so. This room is the result of all that knowledge, settling down as it assimilates completely. Up to this point, you've been drawing on it as a separate entity. Now it's yours completely, cheered Pandora, her arms flying about in an overjoyed gesture. Naruto smirked into his fist as he chuckled at his adoptive mother's antics. He was mildly surprised when the thought wasn't followed by the now signature awkward feeling, but pushed the matter aside. Opening his mouth to ask another question, he missed the happy blush on the Greek woman's face. So all these records are just representations of the knowledge I've accumulated so far? The goddess hummed slightly before answering, yes and no. Right now the room is just displaying all the possible authorities you could have. To simplify, all the knowledge shoved into the head of the Campione comes from the Akashic record, a recording of all future and past possibilities for our universe. I do believe you gave Plutarch quite the headache a few years ago when that sliver of your soul fell into our dimension, she said nonchalantly, as if talking about nothing more than a news broadcast. If Naruto had been drinking anything at that moment, he'd have taken a spit take. Actually, this was his mind, so did that mean if he imagined a glass of water it would appear? Inwardly he debated the pros and cons of summoning a glass of water just to do a spit take. Unaware of her adoptive child's musings, the goddess shrugged off her previous line of thought and continued with her explanation. The reason you couldn't play any of the records was because you have yet to obtain the authority, or it is no longer possible for you to gain them, and as such Plutarch, the keeper of the Akashic record, has censored them, the girl stated without fanfare. Shaken from his spit-taking thoughts, Naruto nodded to the goddess theory, although he had the distinct thought someone should probably give Plutarch a hug, or perhaps a cookie. No idea why he did, but he did. Okay, now he's confusing himself. Shaking away his confusion, he looked towards the goddess who had trailed off at some point. Better get this show on the road. He sighed. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, what was this gift you were talking about? He may have sounded a bit ungrateful, but he was 12, and you try stopping yourself from getting excited when someone says they've got a present for you. The goddess blinked, as if coming back to reality, before giving him a motherly smile. Almost like she was watching an overexcited 5-year-old. That involves another explanation, she said joyfully, as if explanations were the next best thing since sliced bread. Now that he thought about it, from the Marquis' rather limited lecture on Campione, he could gather the only real time Pandora ever got to talk to anyone was when someone killed a god, and even then they don't really remember it. It seems he was the odd one out even among the odd. His attention was however returned to the goddess, only to find her pouting in what most people would call an adorable fashion. Naruto however wasn't all that normal, that and had lived with Shizuka, no matter how short it was. Therefore he only found it cute, extremely cute. Smiling sheepishly at Pandora, he waved for her to continue explaining. Giving a cross humph, she continued, as you would know had you been paying attention. Q glare, the authorities acquired by killing Rouge gods are much like the extra knowledge given during rebirth. The all-knowing woman explained, her features softening as she continued to lecture him, that is that they both have to be assimilated. The more of the authority you incorporate into your body and mind, the easier the authority will be to use, and the more willing the authority will become to follow your commands, without lashing out at you. Pandora looked at him to make sure he was following along, beaming proudly when she found Naruto listening intently to her every word. Naruto was pretty sure she could have been a great teacher. As more of the authority is subsumed, you won't have to worry about lengthy chants or harsh consequences for using an authority too long. Of course there are still consequences, just far less damning. Breathing, the still joyful goddess skipped back to her seat having left it at some point. My gift comes in 2 parts or 3 I guess. I sorta might be accidentally made a door to your mind when I was working with the original presence. The goddess chuckled nervously as she avoided eye contact, playing idly with her hands. So you basically have an all-access pass to my part of the netherworld. Shaking her head, the bubbly goddess bounced in her seat. As for the intentional part of the gift, well, I sped up the assimilation process for your authorities, which is unfortunately only a one-time thing, so don't go expecting me to do it every time, okay? Staring at her face, Naruto could tell that was a lie. All he had to do was put on a few crocodile tears, sniffle a bit and she would crumble. He knew it, she knew it, but Naruto wasn't going to take advantage of her like that. He idly wondered if she'd spoiled all her demigod children silly with how weak her defenses were. She probably had. Agreeing with the goddess, Naruto blinked as she got up to leave, a door popping up right in front of her as it creaked open. So stunned was the blonde that he only managed to call out when she was halfway through the door, "Mom." The goddess paused, sticking her head out of the halfway shut door. "Yes, Naruto?" she said curiously, her eyes alight in inquiry. "What about the third part?" Pandora giggled mischievously, her face a mixed expression of laughter and a sly smile as she laughed at some unknown comedy. "That's a secret," was her call, as she shut the door behind her. The last thing he remembered before he returned to the land of the living was the distinct feeling of his eyebrow twitching uncontrollably. Reality. He sat up straight, his hands rubbing the sleep from his eyes, out of habit. Glancing around the room he was momentarily confused. This isn't my dorm room. Scanning the room, for a few minutes his memories of the past few days assaulted him. Only for Pandora's parting words to echo in his head. Groaning, he slumped in the comfy white chair. Pandora, he cursed internally. Would it kill her to give a straight answer? Her bright smile echoing through his head, along with her parting words. "It's a secret, of course, it's a secret, yeah, that explains everything," thought the Kusanagi sarcastically, pushing himself out of the warm, comfortable chair. Naruto thought of a disgruntled sigh. What, the chair was really soft and comfortable. Some idle part of his mind was even plotting to abuse his newfound authority in order to have it moved into his dorm, but that is neither here nor there. Stretching out his legs, he paused to brush off some imaginary dust before sneaking out of the room quiet as a mouse, as he made sure not to wake the still sleeping Olsen. Shutting the softly, he gave another yawn. "To the library I go," he thought cheerfully. He really did need to look up what his crazed, power-hungry, delusional, god-killing, adoptive siblings were doing. He'd rather know what he was getting into than be surprised later. After all, pulling out his still singed cell phone, Naruto was surprised to find he'd slept most of yesterday away. Heck, he'd slept a good portion of today away too, considering it was 9:45 am. The Godslayer shrugged, before marching his way to the library. Only stopping to grab a sandwich. Well, a sandwich platter. What? He was hungry. On his way, he finally, with the help of dozens of servants, found the ever-elusive library. Based upon how large the room was, he assumed someone had used some sort of magic to expand it. It was somewhat breathtaking, row upon row of shelves filled with books of all kinds, While Naruto was no librarian, he took pride in the fact that he could still see the beauty in such a large collection of human knowledge. Cracking his neck, Naruto decided it was time to hit the books. Wandering through the aisles, he pulled off any tome that might have a reference to the current generation of campioni. By the time he was satisfied with his findings, his stack of books was well over his height, as it towered over some of the shorter shelves. Pulling a chair over to his pile of knowledge, he picked up one of the books and called upon his magic. Letting the arcane energy flow through his, molding it as he cast the spell, in seconds he could feel the knowledge pierce his mind and assimilate almost instantly. It was however at this exact moment that Naruto decided he probably wasn't going to use this spell all that often, and never on a fictional book. It just felt wrong and so foreign. As the knowledge was assimilated into his mind, there was none of the sense of accomplishment that came with finishing a book, none of the excitement of reading a story, nor was there the satisfaction of memorizing a fact. It was so mechanical, like someone decided randomly to chisel the entire 5th volume of deities and their heretics into his mind, but did so with no emotion, like they took every bit of pride contained within each word, and replaced every ounce of pride with a pound of apathy. Another downer was that he literally knew the entire book word for word, and he would never be able to forget it. Let's just say there was a lot of thing about heretic gods he didn't want to know. Why would anyone want to know that the heretic deity Aphrodite had killed over 100 campioni using only pure sexual prowess? Either way, I don't think he'll be using that spell again anytime soon. Shrugging it off, he pulled out a different book from his stack and set to work. He spent hour after hour, flipping stale dust-ridden pages with interest as he silently absorbed every word, each book leaving him with question after question, new curiosities breaking through with every page. Question like if he could pull ambrosia from his dragon's hoard authority. After testing it out, he could safely say no to that. Or what was wiping out the campioni every few hundred years? He even idly contemplated if he was going to live to his 20s, as it seemed, he had been reborn during a time with an almost unheard of amount of campioni, the opportune time for whatever had been wiping campioni out for centuries to show its face, don't you think? On the subject of campioni, what had found was rather surprising. While there were only 6 living campioni at the moment, over the last 200 years over 40 people had staked claim to the title. The thing was over half of them had died within 24 hours of ascension, and a fourth of the original amount had died within a week. Those remaining had either died within a year, or lived on to become the campioni of today. Naruto groaned, rubbing his tired eyes, refusing to read another word of the book. With its archaic take on Old English, and rather biased views on just about everything, he was surprised the book had lasted through the centuries without being set on fire, at least once. Rubbing his temples, he closed his eyes, as to not burn the copy of Truth and Facts of Devil Kings. Peeved. More like How to Shove a Pole Up Your Ass for Dummies. Shoving the book away as to not tempt himself, he climbed to his feet, stretching his unused limbs. He gave out a satisfied groan. Time to take a break. Naruto cheered, his feet carrying him swiftly out of the library. As he shot out into the winter sun, despite the somewhat chilly air, the 6th king reveled in the warmth the sun brought. Goosebumps rising on his skin at the conflicting feeling of cold air and warm light. It was the clash of metal and clacking of sparks that snapped Naruto out of his sun-warmed revelry. Naruto was vaguely familiar with the sound of blades clashing against each other. After all, had originally attempted training in swordsmanship until his sensei had proclaimed he had no skill, or even potential skill, in any form of martial arts. Over the years, had accepted the fact that his original teacher had been an idiot, and not worth the money. After all, had only been 5 and had never touched a weapon before, so of course he had no skill to speak of. But that was unimportant. As he assessed his surroundings, he was in one of the many courtyards of the Dragon Shrine, and from what he could see, this area had been cleaned up for the most part. A bit of rubble was still lying about, but not too much, and in the center of the courtyard was a girl. She was about his age, probably a year or so younger, with striking solid gold hair, with bright blue eyes, and a pair of nondescript earrings hanging from her ears. A slim red winter jacket wrapping her form, along with a pair of form-fitting jeans. Some symbol that he didn't recognize shone proudly on her back as she danced around, sword in hand. She appeared to be sparring with an average boy, about twice her age, and she was taunting him, her sword sending out sparks with each clash, seemingly bored, as her foot shot forward, hooking behind the boy's ankle, tripping him as she brought her blade to his throat. From diplomacy to alchemy, she had learned whatever she could get her grubby little mitts on. She had sparred with master swordsmen and women, taking every bit advice and experience out of every encounter. Every loss just caused her to grow more, even if it was only a tiny bit stronger. However, Erica would say the most valuable advice she could ever give someone was earned on this day. The sky that was only a moment ago stark royal blue had turned a nightmarish black from hellish smoke. Embers joyfully crackling and fire snickering as it licked its way through what was once a lush valley filled with life and greenery, pine trees once filled with bright green needles, and holding endless amounts of pure white snow, now little more than still warm husks, charcoal tree trunks flickering with veins of fiery orange embers, as the noxious scent of fiery death permeated the dying forest. The girl with weaved gold hair was more than 2 miles away, yet she could still feel the fires as if it was dragging a tongue over her cold flesh. Beads of sweat poured down her brow, clinging to her body as she was forced to gasp down sickeningly hot air, only to cough up the smoke-laced oxygen moments later. Her ash-covered fingers digging into the inky black remains of local flora as she struggled to stay conscious, the world spinning in a dizzying display of orange, yellow, and black, sparks snickering through the underbrush, as the world twisted unnervingly to her sight. It was on this day that Erica Blandelli was reaffirmed in her belief that Campioni were monsters of luck and insanity, beings that thrived in chaos just as her father had warned. It was on this day, however, that Erica Blandelli learned that the sixth king was something to be feared, because Campioni were monsters. That much was true, but the sixth king was a dragon. A dragon hiding in a coat made from its own skin. A few hours earlier Erica Blandelli was frustrated. It wasn't all that surprising. After all, she had a lot of things to be frustrated about. After all, the blonde had been forced into an assignment in Sweden, place she had a very well-known distaste, at least during the winter months, that is. Once it hit summer she was all for a quick trip over. But alas, it had only just turned to January a few days before, and as such any form of warm weather may as well have not existed in the first place as far as Erica was concerned. Then there was the needless politicking she'd been forced to do after encountering that woman. In Erica's opinion, that woman really needed to loosen up. After finally getting the 18-year-old off her back, she'd been forced to act like some common fragile girl, all while putting up a cutesy facade, in order to instill the fact that the copper-black cross was made up kind helpful people who would do nothing more than ensure their well-being. It was that image that they wished to maintain. After all, what would you prefer? The kind innocent organization that had one of its representatives selflessly helping crippled people and other wounded into ambulance after a great tragedy? Or the stuffy, easily angered organization that was made up of snobby nobles that couldn't be bothered to lift a finger? It was quite easy to see which of the two options most people would pick, and as such they did their best to project said image. Of course, some people argued that sending a little girl seemed at least mildly unprofessional, and it was to some extent. Of course, only a small portion of the several hundred visitors had the magical power to even perceive the heretical god as anything other than a few explosions, so it might have been a bit overkill to put so much thought into it in the first place. Returning to the original topic, Erica Blandelli had a lot of reasons to be frustrated. One that made more than its fair share of said frustration was what happened after she had finished her stint of straight-faced acting. What was it that caused this, you ask? It was quite simple, really. She didn't know. After watching the ever-stern shrine representative pass out from exhaustion, she had, for some reason that she couldn't possibly comprehend, followed the person who had been charged with putting her to bed. She could recall every single detail of the entire escapade. She could recall asking the several of the many caretakers that made their home at the shrine multiple meaningless questions, before then following the boy as he hauled the 18-year-old all over the shrine. But for some reason, the entire memory seemed to grate at her mind, almost as if she'd forgotten something increasingly important. It had been hours since she had left the blonde alone with Alexandra, and she'd been forced to deal with the nagging feeling grating against her nerves ever since. In an attempt to drown out the headache she could already feel developing, she had gathered every potential mage that had interest in learning how to use a close-quarters weapon. After all, she might as well take out her frustration on the newbies. It had been 2 hours since then, and not one of them had lasted longer than a minute against her, thus resulting in an even worse headache brought on by their incessant complaining, and the urge to murder every single one of them in frustration. Not a single one had allowed her to express her frustration, and to be honest, it was kind of sad. The future Diavolo Rosso knew just how much she towered over those in her age group, but these were full-grown men, and women she was holding back too. None of them had even managed to press her in any way, and frankly it was getting depressing. They were adults, they should fight like it. Even now she was fighting, and her opponent hadn't even managed to scratch her while she was distracted by mentally ranting about her frustration. Even as she put her opponent on his back, and laid the tip of her practice sword on the Mon's throat, she couldn't help but complain that it felt like bullying a 4-year-old, and it made her feel bad too. Grown men honestly should nt pout like that after losing. It was creepy. Not that she showed that as she shook the Mon's hand with a straight face and complimented the Mon's tenacity. Now that she thought about, she should probably look up what that word meant. It wouldn't do for her to use the word in the wrong context after all. Shaking the errant thought away, she cleared her throat. Anyone else want to give it a go? A pleasant smile on her face glowing like a tiny sun, even though she felt like sulking in a dark corner somewhere. Sure, a voice called out steadily, "I'll give it a shot." Now that had Erika's attention. Ever since she had finished the first match as quickly as she could, every challenger had wavered momentarily, and choked on their words. All of them had been hesitant and nervous, which was fine. After all, most of the people here had never touched a blade of any sort beyond kitchenware in their lives, so such a reaction was expected. But well, when your opponent flinched at your every move. Yeah, it got annoying after a while. However, this new challenger, his voice hadn't wavered even an inch. There was no slight change in tone, or even sign of hesitation. If anything, he sounded vaguely excited. Turning her head to the person who had caught said attention, she found herself staring at the very boy she had been stalking only a few hours beforehand. He was a boy around her age, probably a year or two older and on the taller side of the height scale. Sun-kissed skin giving him away as either a tourist or a visitor, spiky blonde hair flailing about randomly in the breeze as he smiled cheerfully at her, his blue eyes sparkling happily. A green jacket hanging from his hand as he slipped it out of it, revealing the plain white t-shirt underneath. She caught a glimpse of metal around his neck, signaling that he was wearing a necklace. Don't look at it, of some sort. The Blandelli, however, didn't get a good look at it as he instinct screamed at her to avoid looking at whatever it was that hung from the boy's neck. Following her instinct, she looked away from his chest and into the boy's sapphire eyes, as they glowed with something akin to anticipation. Accepting the older boy's challenge with raised eyebrow, she nodded her head in the direction of several racks filled to the brim with a high variety of melee weapons. Take one and well, see if your shot has any accuracy. That had sounded way better in her head, declared the admittedly frustrated Blandelli. The boy took no insult to her haughty reply, simply rolling his eyes in response as he almost skipped over to the weapon racks, his feet slapping softly against the stone of the now ruined courtyard, scattering bits of broken stone and sending rocks scattering as he practically pranced towards the weapon rack. Erika was extremely grateful that the shrine staff had taken the time to clean out the actual sparring area of debris. Huffing, Erika walked aside of the chalk square opposite the racks of weapons, the group of people she had been teaching having grouped up on her left to watch the upcoming spar. It was, however, just as she took position at her end of the chalk square that a chill went down her spine, her instincts screaming at her in a parody of a hellhound's howl, sweat beading down her forehead, and the hairs on her neck raised, as the northern courtyard suddenly lost any pretense of warmth. Not that anyone else seemed to have noticed, of course. The crowd on the sidelines continued uninhibited and unaware, even as a flock of birds flapped away in terror. It was only after several seconds that Erika was able to break out of whatever phantom had possessed her body. Moving mechanically like a living doll as her eyes immediately honed in on what caused her instincts to go haywire, it was the very blonde she was supposed to be sparring against, his eyes trained upon what looked to be one of the several enchanted spears provided by the shrine. It was as his hand reached out for the spear did the feeling return full force, screaming like a dying beast, screaming that whatever should happen she should not let that monster touch a spear, let alone hold the polearm, or God forbid use one. The Erika Blandelli who had actively fought against heretic deities would have recognized that feeling. The Erika Blandelli who had stood side by side with Kusanagi Godu as he challenged Varithrania would have shivered mildly. The Erika Blandelli who had been there to see Salvatore Dani duel several of his fellow campioni to their bloody death would have done the smart thing and run. But this was not the Diavolo Rosso who had stood cheekily beside the mad soon-to-be Godslayer. This was not the concubine of the seventh as he was called in a parallel universe king. No, this was Erika Blandelli, the 11-year-old knight hopeful. This was the Erika whose only true fight had been with a slime divine beast who were somehow even weaker than their video game counterparts. This particular Erica was already snippy and impatient after several hours of sparring with severely inadequate opponents. As such, when the feeling evaporated almost instantly, she wrote it off as her imagination. Even if it wasn't her imagination, it was probably some form of aberration in nature, a mild manifestation of a heretic god's summoning, one of the minor consequences of such an alien existence breaking through to this reality. After all, summoning something so powerful was bound to have some consequences, some small thing like minor delusions, and birds dropping dead for no reason, or larger, more impactful events like shifts in the ley lines and the land dying off. So the younger blonde discarded the sensation, writing it off as a natural occurrence. She was right, of course. The sensation was entirely natural after all, but for different reasons than she thought. After all, it was an entirely natural reaction when you were about to fight what amounted to a natural disaster in physical form. Calming the beating of her heart, as the boy walked back towards the chalk square with a spear in hand, so mundane was the spear that Erica was almost concerned that it wouldn't have any of the safety enhancements the other weapons did. Something proven wrong when the blade rippled a strange rainbow color when the light struck it just the right way. As the boy entered the square, he mirrored her, taking his own relaxed stance as she fell into her own. "What are the rules?" the boy asked confidently, his eyes aimed straight into her own. She could feel the frustration build up in her chest as some part of her shouted, to get the fight started already. Explaining the rules, she could only hope he would give her a small challenge. And shiver, cause god damn was it cold out there. Naruto was lost in thought. Even as he proposed the duel, he was on autopilot, his feet taking him to his goal. He was utterly lost in thought. The reason for this was quite simple. Wen had started thinking of spars as entertainment and stress relief. He had always liked sparring, but this was different. He found the rush exhilarating but had never thought of them as a mundane part of his life, like playing football or kendo. No, it had always held some form of unique danger. They were fun, but each spar had an edge to it, almost like any mistake would lead to death. Now it was just sport, a particularly enjoyable sport, but nothing to worry about, not like a slip would result in someone losing their hand or anything, right? Except it could, and that fact didn't bother him at all. He contemplated idly as he picked out a spear autonomously, his subconscious having picked out a fouchard for his weapon. He hardly noticed it as he slipped into a stance. It was only as he felt his lips ask a question without his prompting did he snap out of his trance. The blonde girl across from his rolled her eyes in such a way that most people would have missed it. "Full contact," the Italian girl announced, her accent giving away her origin. A hint of annoyance coated her words, once again imperceptible to most people. As a false patience concealed it, she seemed frustrated for some reason. Had he insulted her in some way? Perhaps had missed something Shed said? Either way, she seemed quite eager for the spar to start. But she still continued to explain the rules to him. No going outside the chalk outline. 3 fatal hits makes the winner. No magic. And don't worry, the blades are enchanted and won't do anything more than bruise. Raising an eyebrow at the girl, he nodded. She, seemingly taking that as the end of his questions, gestured to the man standing in as referee. The stand-in glanced at both of them, seeming trying to tell if they were both ready before yelling "start" at the top of his lungs. The 11-year-old ran forward, a flurry of slashes flowing from her sword as she took a fairly aggressive method of attack. Naruto, however, was undaunted, sidestepping her sword. He used the hooked side of the fouchard, or should he be calling it a glaive since the pole was so short, to stop her sword temporarily, something that seemed to have stunned the smaller girl, before hooking the pole of the weapon under her feet, sending her to the ground, with his blade at her neck before she could even react. As the girl tumbled into the ground, Naruto blinked. That was way easier than usual. Heck, he wasn't even trying all that hard. She was moving so slow, and he barely put any strength into it at all. He almost smacked himself the second he realized it. How could he be so stupid? He was a campione, a devil king, as Marquis had put it earlier during his little show of strength earlier that day. He, as a devil king, had strength far exceeding that of a full-grown adult, and it wasn't that she was moving too slow, but that he was moving too fast. Cutting himself from his thoughts, his hands gripping the glaive, as had decided it was definitely a glaive, as he found the previously confused girl smirking at him. He didn't know why, and he didn't care to ask how, but he knew for some strange reason, with a tingling chill, that this girl smirking at him was not good for his future health. Thanks for watching.